Hello everyone. If you like this audiobook and want to listen to more, please consider subscribing. And if you like this video, like it as well, that it enjoy.
Fall of the First Dragonborn. Fall of the First Dragonborn. You're truly strong, current Dragonborn, tell me, what is your name? Asked a man in a raspy voice, his body covered in wounds and wrapped in the scorched remains of what was once a mighty armor. He was known as the First Dragonborn, the original chosen of the Thuum, now standing on the corrupted ground of Apocrypha, the dark realm where he had been imprisoned for centuries, enslaved by one of the most feared Daedric princes, Hermaeus Mora. He had gathered power for countless generations, feeding on mortal dreams, devouring forbidden knowledge, all for the sole purpose of escaping. But in the process, he had lost himself. He betrayed the dragons who had granted him power as a dragon priest. He betrayed Hermaeus Mora, who had given him the knowledge to bend even the winged beasts to his will. And more than anyone, he betrayed himself. "Aina," replied the young man with a firm voice, just before unleashing his final shout, a Thuum that shook even the roots of the dark realm. A roar filled with determination that pierced through the defenses of the first Dragonborn, weakening him once and for all. Miraak, the immortal, the corrupted, the rebellious slave, fell to his knees. He had lost. But just as he prepared to strike back, a black tentacle emerged from the shadows and pierced through his back without mercy. Miraak has fulfilled his purpose. It is time for him to return to the void, declared an unmistakable voice, that of his eternal jailer. Hermaeus Mora, Daedra of knowledge and memory. As the tentacles wrapped around him, dragging him into the darkness of non-existence, Miraak did not feel fear. He felt frustration. He had waited so long, planned every move, only to be betrayed once more. Like before, like always. But this time, something was different. Aina's final Thuum hadn't just wounded him, it had fractured the very fabric of Apocrypha. Hermaeus Mora failed to fully absorb his soul. The power Miraak had amassed over millennia was too vast. He would not die easily. So, in one last decision, Miraak gambled everything. He condensed every remaining fragment of his essence, his body like a bomb about to detonate. He raised his hand and threw his gear toward Aina. "You've earned it." And then he exploded. A brutal wave of energy shook the Daedric realm, tearing through tentacles, structures, and even reality itself. A final act of defiance. A direct wound to the domain of a Daedric prince. Aina, bloodied and covered in dust, stepped back and frowned. He had fought Miraak for 20 days and 20 nights without rest, a battle that could only be described as legendary. And yet, he hadn't witnessed its full end. It was a victory interrupted. One he wasn't sure should be celebrated, or feared. For a brief instant, Miraak looked at him through the shadows of his own destruction. And he understood. That boy's aura was not ordinary. He wasn't just a Dragonborn. There was something more. And then, he fell. Darkness. Absolute darkness. A void without time, without space. True nothingness. And a broken soul, exhausted, suspended in what might be the cruelest hell, to exist without existing. Perhaps that was his punishment. Or maybe it was a place so deep, not even Hermaeus Mora understood its limits. Years, centuries, maybe millennia, dissolved into an eternal present. But Miraak kept his consciousness. And with it, his memories. And those memories began to repeat endlessly, like divine punishment. He relived every wrong choice, every betrayal, every mistake. He remembered the evil he had committed. And for the first time, he accepted it. Perhaps, truly, he deserved the punishment. And just as that thought settled, he felt it. Something pulled his soul downward. As if the void itself spat him out. He fell. Though he could neither see nor feel clearly, he sensed the fall. And then, light, stars, artificial lights, a sky torn by a glowing crack. And then, the wind. True wind. Miraak opened his eyes. He was falling from the sky, straight into a city of steel, lights, and noise. Around him, metallic carriages moved without horses, and buildings so tall they would make the ancient dragon temples tremble with envy. He crashed into the ground with violent force, creating a crater that rocked the area. The mortals nearby fled in terror, believing a meteorite had struck the city. Miraak slowly pushed himself up with a rough groan. His body, strong and muscular, ached like in the oldest days. He hadn't felt pain since his final battle against Aina. He looked around. Blinding lights, overwhelming noise, images moving by themselves on gigantic screens. And him, almost naked, with only an ancient garment barely covering him. His face was stern, weathered by time, his blue eyes radiating wisdom and danger. His hair, a pale golden shade, fell over a firm brow, and his unshaven face gave him the air of an eternal warrior. "Am I free?" he murmured, extending his senses. He could feel it, the lives, the thoughts, the emotions all around him, as if the whole world was whispering to him. Several people stared at him, a mix of horror, confusion, and curiosity. After all, it wasn't every day that a half-naked man fell from the sky. Merak felt the weight of their gazes. For a moment, irritation flickered in his mind. But he remembered the darkness, he remembered his punishment. And he let the rage go. He vanished. When he rematerialized, he stood atop a building, observing the city from above, the wind brushing against his face. "This is not Tamriel," he said solemnly, sensing the obvious. Another plane. The air felt different in this world. Too clean, too dense, as if it were saturated with invisible noise and strange energy floating between buildings like an artificial whisper. Flickering lights, moving symbols on giant screens. Mortals, humans, watched him from the streets with wide, confused eyes, as if they were witnessing an aberration fallen from the sky. Merak did not look back. He stood at the edge of a building that seemed impossible, taller than any tower in Morrowind, more imposing than the temples of the ancient dragons. The wind tossed his hair, and his body, forged through millennia of battle, remained steady and composed. But then he felt it. A tremor, subtle, like a shiver in the soul of the air. A presence, not a creature, nor an army, not even a god, but a will, distant and powerful, that watched him from above, as if passing judgment. The sky, which until that moment had ignored him, now seemed to loathe his existence. There were no words, no warning, he simply felt it coming. A celestial discharge descended with impossible speed. A pure, perfect lightning bolt, like the burning finger of a divine throne. And it was aimed at him. There was no time for analysis. No time for awe. Wold, na, Kest. The world bent, reality folded around him, and his figure turned into a fleeting blur. He vanished just before the bolt struck. Boom. The explosion rocked the rooftop with brutal force. The blast tore chunks of concrete loose, sent shards of glass flying across dozens of buildings, and triggered alarms several blocks away. A column of smoke, fire, and raw electricity rose over the city. From a nearby rooftop, Merak reappeared. Smoke drifted from his skin. His face showed no expression, not because he felt nothing, but because he had long since learned not to show it. "The master of this plane attacks without question. Interesting," he murmured calmly, sensing the clouds swirl once more, hungry. The sky roared like an ancient beast. Merak slowly raised a hand. It hurt. Part of the lightning had grazed him, searing his unprotected body. Not as much as the punishments of Apocrypha, but enough to remind him that danger still existed, even here. He placed his hand on his chest and inhaled. Feim, Zii, Gron. His flesh turned to mist. His silhouette, a whisper. He vanished completely, like a shadow that did not belong to this world. He needed time, information, a place to think, and above all, to savor the strange sensation he was only just beginning to understand. Freedom. After centuries of slavery, suffering, and darkness, he was free. Classroom, New York. Percy was staring out the window. It was a sunny day. No storms, no clouds, and yet, something fell from the sky. First, a light, then, a thunderclap, as if the world had been torn by a divine spear. A lightning bolt descended from a clear sky, so perfect it looked crafted by a god himself. The shockwave made the windows rattle. A distant alarm wailed. Several students screamed. Percy didn't. He simply felt a knot in his stomach. A strange pressure, as if his body, by instinct, had recognized that something had just changed. "What was that?" he muttered, eyes still fixed on the sky, wide open. He didn't know, but at that very moment, a new presence was crossing the skies above the city. One that had no thread in the loom of the fates. An existence that was never meant to be there. And whose mere presence could unravel every destiny it touched. The silence among the crowd. "I'm just starting to read the Percy Jackson books, so if I made any mistakes involving characters who show up later on, I apologize in advance. I do have a few major spoilers, like the Fates, but I'm sure there are far more dedicated fans out there who'll notice things I've missed. Please be kind." Now, back to what matters. One chapter isn't enough for a fair vote, so I'll be sharing another chapter from both stories. Don't forget to go to the voting post and pick your favorite. The winning story will take over once HPDC ends, and trust me, we're getting very close to that moment. The silence among the crowd. People walked without paying attention, each lost in their own thoughts, until a subtle chill, barely perceptible, ran down their spines like a cold breath from the void. Some stopped, glanced around, looked up at the sky, but saw nothing. Only silence, and then they continued on, unaware of what had disturbed them. No one knew that, at that very moment, an invisible figure was walking the streets with steady steps and a sharp gaze. No one perceived it, no one sensed it, it was like a shadow that cast no shadow. Miraak, the first Dragonborn, he moved among mortals unaware of his presence, analyzing each structure, each piece of technology, every word printed on glowing signs. He wasn't confused. For someone who had spent centuries trapped in Apocrypha, where all knowledge converged, deciphering a new plane wasn't difficult. It only required observation. He already understood the language. Hermaeus Mora had granted him the gift of absorbing knowledge innately, and languages, no matter how foreign, unraveled before his mind. He grasped them instantly. The words of this world felt simple to him, almost primitive in structure. He passed by a concrete wall, and walked through it. He didn't need doors. He entered a random residence as easily as a thought crosses the mind. There, toward the back, he found what he was looking for, clothing. Garments hung from a clothesline. He examined them coldly, selecting those that matched his size. He took a gray shirt, black pants, soft, elastic, made of a fabric unknown to him, and a heavier item he assumed was a short cloak. But once he put it on, he realized it was different. A kind of enclosed outerwear, with an attached hood. On the back, a symbol, a stylized skull, and just beneath it, the word, death. Miraak read it easily. He understood its message. A direct statement, crude, honest. He liked it. Curious design for a common garment, he murmured as he pulled the hood over his head. It wasn't like his dragon priest mask, but it at least concealed his face. Walking with his head uncovered felt wrong. Too exposed. He left the residence as he had entered, without a trace, and walked among the crowd. His gaze scanned the weak bodies around him. Their gestures, their habits, the glowing objects they held so tightly. Lifeless devices, all of them seemed inferior to even the simplest villagers of Solstheim. And yet, this world remained standing. There are no records of this plane, he thought as he walked. None. Not even Hermaeus Mora had spoken of a world like this. And that only made it more interesting. He soon reached a clean, modern building with glass doors and sleek columns. Through the windows, he saw endless shelves, lined with books. A library, perfect. He entered unnoticed. He moved like a whisper, like a breeze no one feels. No one saw him as he picked up a book, opened it, and read each page with precise movements. His speed was inhuman. Every word was locked into his memory the moment his eyes touched it. He took one, read it, returned it, then another, and another. Hours passed without trace, then days. When he finally closed the last book, the light of dawn was filtering once again through the windows. The library, closed for hours, now lay in shadows. And he was done. Every text, every page, every story. 1 week, he murmured, placing a book titled World War II and its consequences back in its place. That was all it took to destroy themselves. He turned toward a shelf in the back. The word mythology was written in golden letters. He took a step forward, then stopped. He remembered the lightning. It wasn't magic, not as he knew it. It had no structure, no form. It was something simpler, and far more absolute. Will. He touched his chin, thoughtful. The lightning that struck him when he arrived in this world didn't match any school of sorcery. Too fast, too precise, as if an unseen presence had marked his arrival and decided to act. There was no proof, only suspicion, and for him, that was enough. But something on the street caught his attention. He turned to the window. There it was, a massive creature, with a single horn curved forward and a body clad in golden armor, walked down the center of the street. Gigantic, monstrous. And no one seemed to notice. Miraak watched it intently. What are you? He didn't know. He had read every book in that place, and not one mentioned anything like it. This wasn't hidden information. It was invisible information. The mortals simply couldn't see it. He left the library in silence. The creature stopped. It raised its head and began sniffing the air like a beast sensing a predator it couldn't see. Its golden eyes slowly turned in Miraak's direction. Even though he remained in an ethereal state, It shouldn't be able to perceive me. The creature clawed at the ground, lowered its head, and tensed its limbs. Ready to charge. Merak exhaled slowly. His form began to solidify, gradually, like a shadow gaining substance. He glanced at the sky, just briefly, wondering if judgment would fall again. Nothing. And then the beast attacked. The ground shook. Its charge was relentless. But before impact, Merak raised a hand and grabbed the horn with absolute control. The earth cracked beneath him from the force of the blow, but he didn't move. The creature roared, struggled, tried to break free. Useless. With a clean motion, Merak ripped the horn out, then drove it through the creature's forehead. The body fell silently. Moments later, it began to dissolve into golden dust, floating briefly before vanishing completely. Only the horn remained, resting on the ground. Merak picked it up. He studied it closely. Interesting, he said simply. His tone was neutral, but his eyes held genuine interest. This world was strange, and he had only begun to understand it. Inside a vast museum filled with polished columns and gleaming display cases, dozens of small mortals ran in every direction. Voices, laughter, and footsteps echoed among the statues, as if that sacred place were just another playground. Merak entered in silence, invisible to all eyes. He walked slowly, his gaze fixed on every detail, carefully analyzing the explanations describing the so-called gods. His eyes paused slightly longer on one particular figure, a man of stone holding a bolt of lightning in his hand. He didn't know why, but the image stirred something uncomfortable inside him. Then he moved on, examining the panels one by one. Each one recounted the feats of supposed heroes. Some were interesting, others, simply ridiculous in comparison to what he had lived through. And a few were disturbingly familiar. Feats he had accomplished himself in the past, or that he had witnessed in the last Dragonborn, Ina. Fascinating, isn't it? The voice came from behind, calm and curious. Merak had already sensed the presence approaching, but since it lacked any hostile intent and did not trigger his blood instinct, he ignored it. Still, there was something strange about the energy. It wasn't magic as he knew it, but it was definitely not normal. He turned slowly. An older man in a motorized wheelchair looked at him with a neutral expression. Merak studied him in silence for a moment, analyzing every detail. The heroes, the man continued, gesturing toward the statues, performed impossible feats. They earned fame, power, some became legends. There was a brief pause before he added. But there were others too. Heroes no one ever heard of, or who chose to hide from the world. Merak shifted his gaze toward the figure of the god holding the lightning bolt, and then slowly raised his arm, pointing at it with a slight motion. Tell me about him, Zeus, father of all, chief of the Greek pantheon, lord of the lightning, the man said without hesitation. His power lies in controlling the skies. Or more precisely, the lightning. The guide's voice was firm, as if he had recited that speech 1,000 times. His father, Kronos, devoured all his children at birth to avoid a prophecy. But his mother, Rhea, saved Zeus. He grew up, returned, and tricked Kronos into vomiting, freeing his siblings. Together, they defeated him. And ever since, the three great ones rule the world: Poseidon over the sea, Hades over the dead, and Zeus over the sky. Merak listened in silence, never taking his eyes off the statue. Then he spoke. Why would he attack without warning? The man frowned slightly, as if the question was somehow inappropriate. Then he looked more intently at Merak. In many stories, Zeus is just brave, a protector. But he can also act on impulse. Sometimes he's described as paranoid. There isn't always a clear reason. His words faded into the air as he turned his head, glancing toward a nearby hallway. I'm sorry, my group needs me, he said, and began to roll away without looking back. Merak continued observing the statue. The lightning, the face of stone, the authoritative posture. A paranoid god, he murmured calmly. Then, it was you. For an instant, the air around him shifted. His battle instinct awakened, not as a conscious act, but as an ancient reflex. Pure, primal, like a wolf sensing blood on the wind. Several nearby visitors shuddered without knowing why. The guide, now several meters away, abruptly turned back with a serious, slightly alarmed expression, scanning the crowd for something, or someone. But Merak was already gone. He walked away from the museum at a calm pace, avoiding the constant noise of the human children who still ran through the corridors. Until he stopped. A few meters ahead, a boy was walking alongside another who moved strangely. Marak immediately recognized an energy similar to the man from before, concealed, difficult to perceive. But that was not who caught his attention. It was the first one. Black hair, green eyes, a cheerful voice as he spoke with his friend. Smiling, fragile, completely unaware of what walked near him. And an aura, barely perceptible, but familiar, too familiar. Like Inaz, not in strength, but in what it hid inside. Marak watched him closely as he passed by. Neither the boy nor his companion noticed. But something had stirred, a spark, and Marak, though he kept walking, would not forget that presence. The one who might one day give him the thrill of battle again. A worthy opponent, several children had gathered around a water fountain. It was recess, and the group ate while talking, laughing, or running between the shadows of the museum. Among them were the two who had caught Marak's attention earlier. A red-haired girl approached with a mocking gait, followed by two friends. She held what was left of her lunch and, without saying more than a sarcastic, well, dumped it onto one of the boy's legs. The other boy stood up immediately, his face tense. He took a step forward, ready to intervene, but didn't have to. The girl suddenly flew backward, as if shoved by an unseen force, and landed straight into the fountain, soaking herself completely. Everyone fell silent. The girl screamed, her soaked hair sticking to her face in furious strands. Percy pushed me. It was him. The boy blinked, confused. I didn't touch her. The group's teacher arrived in seconds, restoring order with sharp movements and a commanding voice. Her gaze locked on Percy with a strange calm, almost satisfaction. "Mr. Jackson, follow me," she said, her smile oddly triumphant. The other boy tried to step in. "Wait, it was me," he said, taking a step forward. But the teacher dismissed him without interest. She barely glanced his way. "I don't think so, Mr. Underwood. You stay here." Percy lowered his head and followed the woman as she walked away with surprisingly quick strides. When he looked up, she was already several meters ahead. He glanced back at his friend. Pale, waiting, perhaps, for the man in the wheelchair to intervene, but he kept reading his novel, completely unconcerned. Percy turned to follow the teacher, but she was no longer there. He saw her again further ahead, near the main vestibule. Waiting for him in silence. He quickened his pace. They crossed a side corridor and entered a deserted gallery. No one else was there. Just the two of them. The woman didn't move. She made a low sound in her throat, something between a growl and a hiss. Percy felt a chill run down his spine. "You've been causing us trouble," the woman said without turning around. "Yes, ma'am," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "Did you really think you could deceive us?" she muttered, and her tone shifted. It now sounded cold, intentional, as if speaking to someone who had already been sentenced. "I'll try harder." Thunder rumbled in the distance. "We're not fools, Percy Jackson. Finding you was only a matter of time." She finally turned. Her face no longer looked human. Her eyes glowed with an unnatural light. "Confess, and you'll suffer less." Percy swallowed hard. He tried to think. Had he done something wrong? His mind raced, desperate for an answer. "Ma'am, it doesn't matter." Her voice cracked. And so did her body. The transformation was sudden. Her clothes dissolved, replaced by leathery wings and elongated claws. Her skin turned gray. Her face twisted into a monstrous grimace full of yellow fangs. A creature. A monster. Percy stepped back, trembling. And then a voice echoed from the distance. "Percy, catch." Something flew through the air. Percy caught it by reflex. A pen. But the moment his fingers wrapped around it, it changed. It elongated. It shimmered. It transformed. A bronze sword. The monster shrieked and lunged at him. Percy barely moved in time. The claws sliced the air where his face had been a heartbeat earlier. His heart pounded wildly. His legs shook. He held the sword awkwardly. He didn't know how to use it. But he held it, and he wouldn't let go. "Die," screeched the creature, lunging again. Percy shut his eyes, raised the sword, and then, nothing. He opened his eyes. The monster was frozen in place. A hand held it by the back of the neck. A steady hand, calm, unyielding. The man who held it stood with his face hidden in shadow, his hood drawn low. Only his gray eyes were visible, and a faint golden stubble on his chin. He didn't seem surprised, not even curious. He was simply observing. "Looks like I might finally get some information on what kind of creature you are," he said calmly. The monster thrashed, screamed, Who are you? It shrieked, lashing out with both claws. But the moment they touched the stranger's skin, they disintegrated. As if they had tried to slash steel. Percy could only stare, still, terrified. The man turned his face slowly toward him, as if just now realizing he was there. Then, his eyes shifted to the sword Percy still held. An interesting weapon, he murmured. And in that instant, unknown to anyone, the thread of Percy Jackson's fate began to shift. Right under the noses of the Fates. Shadows, wings, and whispers. Shadows, wings, and whispers. Percy looked at the man in front of him, confused. He blinked and, in that instant, the figure vanished as if it had never been there. There wasn't a single sound or shadow to indicate anyone had occupied that space. A shiver ran down his spine. Was he going crazy? Without daring to look back, he ran straight out of the museum. Meanwhile, on the building's rooftop, Marak held Professor Dodds, or rather, Alecto, restrained, ignoring her attempts to break free. "All right, let's make this quick," he said, and without hesitation, took the Fury's wings and tore them apart effortlessly. The crack echoed like thunder, drawing a scream of pain from the creature as she collapsed onto the ground. "You, what are you? What do you want?" Alecto spat, her eyes blazing with fury. "Information. It seems mortal books don't contain as much as I expected. Especially because I keep seeing things like you around, though they don't seem able to speak like you do," Marak replied, watching her with cold curiosity. Her wings slowly began to regenerate, but with a simple touch of his finger, Marak broke them again. "You're interrupting the orders of a god. Are you really willing to risk angering him?" The Fury growled. "I've faced things similar to gods, if they count," he retorted, before striking her and placing his boot on her chest, pinning her down. She tried to hurt his leg, without success. Did you use the waters of the river?" she asked suddenly, with a hint of confusion. "I'm not going to answer questions. I'll be the one asking them. And if you're of no use to me, I'll simply destroy you," Marak said, pressing down harder. Alecto looked at him with a mocking expression, without a trace of fear. "Ah, that look, I know it well. Immortality, or something like it. Perhaps coming back from the dead," Marak murmured, analyzing every micro-expression on her face. "No, something similar. You said, God, perhaps he could bring you back. Close, your soul will regenerate you," he said, narrowing his eyes. "I'm still close." She remained silent, staring at him. "Well, no matter. If that's the case, I'll have to adjust my threat. First, a little explanation," Marak said calmly. "Where I come from, there's something called a soul gem. These are created with rituals that infuse soul-trapping magic into fragments of enchanted minerals. The rituals are somewhat complex, but truthfully, not so difficult for someone like me. I can even skip some steps. Using a special spell, I can absorb an animal's soul into these gems, which can then be used to recharge enchantments. What does this do? The soul inside simply transforms into energy, losing its consciousness and becoming pure energy for use." Alecto watched him, as if trying to figure out where he was going with this. "Then there's another type of gem, the black soul gem. These keep your consciousness inside the stone, along with your soul, of course. And when they're used, your consciousness is violently destroyed, as is your soul, turning it into pure energy. But it's considered highly dishonorable, because it prevents your soul from reaching Sovnard. No, wait, using the style of this world, that would be Valhalla," Marak said, watching her calmly. "But I suppose your gods are different, right?" The Fury felt Marak's gaze as heavy as destruction itself. "Well now, I heard a familiar name," someone suddenly said. Marak turned quickly, ready for battle. There stood a man in a modern suit, his tie bearing faintly visible runes for some reason, and a spear in his hand. He smiled calmly, with an eye patch and a neatly kept beard, golden with streaks of gray. "Easy now, I'm not really here. You could call me an epic hologram," the man said with a half smile. "Who are you?" Marak asked seriously. The Fury's eyes widened in shock before she used her freshly healed hand to drive her own claws into her chest, killing herself, while smiling at Marak. He was about to act, but his eyes remained locked on the man in front of him. "It would be better if you didn't do that. You'd be drawing the attention of far more than just that Fury's master," the man said calmly, without stopping Marak. Marak continued to stare at him. "I only came here because I heard an interesting name come out of your mouth. I'm not your enemy, or rather, the blood running through your veins is far too similar to my own," the man said with a smile. Something like, distant cousins, he added, briefly glancing up at the sky. Who are you? Marak repeated. Well, that's not important right now. It's fascinating to see someone from another world with so much in common with ours. I'm not sure who's the copy of whom, and if it weren't for the words you spoke, I wouldn't have noticed you at all, the man said with a grin. How about joining my company? We're hiring. Marak raised an eyebrow. He knew perfectly well what a company was. He had read every book, from ancient to modern, in the library. But looking at this man, he couldn't feel at ease. No, that's a shame. You'd make an excellent employee. How about this? I can see you're not the type to work under someone, but perhaps taking the occasional side job could benefit us both. You, gaining something in a world you don't even know, and me, a friend who can't be dragged down by this place's fate, the man said calmly. Here, this one's free. If you accept, you can come find me, he added, tossing something to him. Marak caught the object and examined it. It was a small flash drive. When he looked back up, the man had vanished as if he had never been there. Marak frowned. Perhaps this world was not as simple or easy as he had first thought. Whispering in an ancient tongue, his body turned to mist and vanished. Change of POV. I'm not crazy. I know I'm not. But how is it that everyone seems to be playing a joke on me? Everyone insists that Ms. Kerr, a stunning blonde I had never seen in my life, had been our teacher all this time, as if Mrs. Dodds had been a product of my imagination. Over the next few days, I tried to bring up Mrs. Dodds to catch them off guard, but all I got were weird looks, like I was some kind of psycho. It got to the point where I almost started believing it, that maybe Mrs. Dodds had never existed at all. But Grover couldn't fool me. Whenever I asked him something about Dodds, he hesitated for a split second before saying she didn't exist. And when I asked him about that man, I even saw his eyes widen in surprise, and something that looked a lot like fear. Something strange was going on, and what happened at the museum was what finally pushed me over the edge. During the day, I didn't have time to think about it. But at night, I still had nightmares about Mrs. Dodds. With the weather going crazy, which wasn't helping my mood at all, one night a storm blew the window out of my room. I started feeling moody and irritable. My grades dropped from inefficient to very inefficient. I fought more with Nancy Bobofit and her friends, and in almost every class one ended up in detention. Eventually, when my English teacher asked me for the millionth time why I was so lazy, I hit my limit. I think I called him an insult. I didn't even know exactly what old drunk meant, but it sounded good. The following week, the principal sent a letter to my mom giving her the official news. Next year, I wouldn't be invited back to enroll. For me, that was a good thing. Or better, yeah, better. I wanted to be with my mom in our apartment, even if it meant going to public school and putting up with my detestable stepdad and his endless poker games. Still, there were things about Yancey I might miss. The view from my dorm window toward the woods, the Hudson River in the distance, the smell of pine. Grover, I guess. I worried about how he'd survive without me next year. I'd also miss Latin class, the crazy competitions with Mr. Brunner, and his faith that I could do well. Exam week was getting closer, and I only studied for his subject. I hadn't forgotten what Brunner told me, that this class could literally be a matter of life and death for me. I don't know why, but at some point I started to believe him. The afternoon before my final exam, I got so frustrated that I threw my Greek mythology book across the dorm. Again, the words on the page seemed to blur and spin around in my head. There was no way I could remember the difference between Chiron and Charon, or between Politius and Politins. Then I remembered Brunner's expression, his 1,000-year-old stare, and his voice telling me, "I will only accept your best, Percy Jackson." I took a deep breath and was about to get up to pick up the book when a hand appeared and grabbed it off the floor before I could. I froze. It was him, the same man from the museum, wearing that insanely cool jacket. You know, you really shouldn't treat books like that. They're a way to record knowledge, and knowledge is power. And power is life, he said, his eyes seeming to glimmer with strange interest as he watched me. Master Marak's first lesson. Master Marak's first lesson. Marak watched the boy closely as he opened the book. His long, steady fingers turned the pages with inhuman speed, the paper barely brushing the air before it was left behind. In the blink of an eye, he had gone through the entire text, absorbing its contents as if pulling them from the very ink and engraving them into his memory. When he closed the book, he did so calmly, the dry thud of its spine echoing through the room like a final note. TTT, who are you? Are you real, or am I hallucinating? Percy's voice wavered between confusion and fear. Again, I don't know if I'm losing my mind. Are you the guy who saved me before? Or, no, I don't know. His words tangled together, as if trapped in a mental loop he couldn't escape. Marak glanced at him sideways, raising an eyebrow with an expression that blended curiosity and mockery. They've lied to you for so long, it's no wonder you're like this. I read in a mortal book that the people of this plane go insane if they're treated as if they were mad. How weak, he said in a dry, almost amused tone. I have a lot of questions for you. What was that thing? Are there more? I've seen strange things before, but never this close. What happened to it? Who are you? Percy blurted out, stepping closer, his brow furrowed and his voice thick with urgency. Human younglings are as noisy as I remember, Marak replied without looking away. Who are your progenitors? The bluntness of the question made Percy hesitate. He didn't know that, to Marak, that aura was unmistakable, an unusual mix of mortal essence and a divine echo. That was why he had watched him for days. Since arriving in this world, Percy was the only one he had found with that kind of energy. What am I supposed to say? Sally Jackson, Percy answered, puzzled. Does she control lightning? No, though she makes a pretty good meatloaf, Percy said, even more confused. And your other progenitor? I never met him. My mother said he was lost at sea. He was a sailor. Marak frowned, studying him carefully. So, you're something like a Dovahkian chosen at random from the souls. He murmured, watching Percy's every movement as if to discern whether he was lying. Finally, he set the book on the desk and turned away, ready to leave. He seemed convinced the boy had no connection to the one who had struck him with lightning on the day of his arrival. Without that link, he had no interest. Wait, Percy said firmly. I answered your questions. Wouldn't it be honorable for you to answer mine as well? Marak turned slowly, raising an eyebrow. Percy held his gaze for a moment, but then lowered his eyes. Ask, Marak said as he sat in the nearest chair, resting an arm casually on the backrest. Percy gave a small smile and began thinking aloud. What happened to Mrs. Dodds? No, why did she try to attack me? No, why did she turn into that? No, what was that? His thoughts jumped from one question to another, unable to settle, until something, like a whisper not his own, slipped into his mind. His gaze drifted toward the window, and even Marak turned his head in the same direction, stroking his beard with silent interest. Percy looked back at him, this time with resolve. Please, train me. Marak's eyes narrowed, weighing the weight of those words. His interest grew, and a deep, rolling laugh burst from his chest. Ya, ha 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 ha. The sound was so powerful the ground began to vibrate. The walls creaked, the windows rattled, and outside, even the storm seemed to pause, as if nature itself were listening. Percy gripped the bedframe to keep from losing his balance. Perhaps you're not the child of that god, but you are the child of someone of his same kind, Marak said when the tremor subsided. Fine, whelp, no, brat. If you dared to ask me that, prepare yourself to suffer. He rose and walked until he stood directly in front of him, his shadow falling over the boy. I've never trained anyone before. But if you die, I will bring you back until you complete your training. I also want to see how far you can go, and in return, I will have my moment for vengeance. A fleeting thought crossed his mind, one he kept to himself, the possibility of achieving in this realm what he could not in the last, to reach a power above all, bowing to no one. Now that he knew gods existed here as well, Percy could be a step toward that goal. Meanwhile, Percy looked up at him with a slight tremor, unsure whether he had just done something courageous, or if he had finally lost his mind by obeying that voice that had urged him to speak. Lord Marak, Percy asked nervously, arms pressed to his sides against the chill of the morning. They stood in the middle of an empty clearing deep in the forest, the grass damp with a layer of frost that bit into his feet. Marak, seemingly unaffected by the cold, sat calmly atop a nearby rock as if it were an improvised throne. For now, call me Master Marak, he replied, not taking his eyes off the boy. Master? Never mind. What's that? Percy asked, pointing incredulously at the two large chests resting in front of him. While searching at the bottom of the sea for some Stalrim, I remembered there are no ancient tombs buried under ice here, Marak explained in his calm, firm tone. According to certain mortal texts, many ships have been found on the ocean floor, so I thought I might find something useful. But all I found was gold. I plan to use it to forge a pair of weapons, but to have acceptable quality, I'd need a proper forge. I won't work with trash. For now, you'll carry this on your back. Percy felt as though everything he had just heard condensed into one absurd idea, carrying chests full of gold, on his back. Sir, I mean, Master Marak, I don't think I can carry a chest that's the same size as me. Not one, you'll carry both. The boy froze. He walked up to one of the chests, grabbed one of the side handles, and tried to lift it. He barely managed to move it a single millimeter before his arms trembled and his muscles burned. He took a deep breath, tried again, and managed to make the heavy structure scrape faintly against the ground. Marak watched him with a mix of disappointment and calculation. To anyone else, seeing a 12-year-old even attempt to move what could easily be 500 kilos of gold would have been astonishing, but not to him. It seems humans in this plane are even weaker than I thought. I had already noticed it, but not to this degree, the Dragonborn commented, watching Percy struggle again and again. Well, now I can lift it, more or less, Percy muttered, panting. The enormous load hung from a backpack reinforced with thick ropes he'd had to buy so it wouldn't fall apart under the weight. He advanced with difficulty, taking clumsy steps, his body hunched over. If people saw me training with a backpack full of ancient gold, I wonder what they'd think. Stop talking and start running, Marak ordered with a hint of annoyance. Percy obeyed, dragging his feet. By the way, sir, I mean, Master Marak, could I keep 1 or 2 coins? You have so many, and I think my mother could really use at least something, if it's not too much trouble, of course. I'll use it to craft weapons and armor, even if it's not the best material for it. You can keep the gemstones. I don't like wearing jewelry. Really, thanks. The sparkle in Percy's eyes gave him the strength to take a few lighter steps. But, if gold isn't a good material, why not just use it to buy something better? He asked, already short of breath. They don't accept gold here. I don't even know where I could buy another material. Well, just trade the gold for money. There's no one who wouldn't want to buy gold, especially if it's ancient. I could ask my teacher. Marak glanced at him from the corner of his eye, and in his mind came the image of the teacher in a wheelchair, cloaked in a concealment spell. His brow furrowed slightly. I'll see what to do later. Stop talking and train. Percy, I finally found you. You've been acting strange all week. What's going on? Grover asked, approaching from behind and giving him a pat on the back. Ow, 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 Percy groaned, twisting in pain from the blow. Grover, don't do that, he said through clenched teeth. Homework? The satyr asked, raising an eyebrow. Yeah, and now I have to go keep working on it, again, Percy replied with exaggerated sadness. He muttered to himself, I was crazy that day for asking for this. And he began walking slowly, as if time itself were trying to delay his return to the training field. I'm here, Master Marak, Percy announced upon arriving, setting the backpack down to one side. Marak was already there, sitting and holding a skewer of meat, roasting it over a makeshift campfire beside him. The Nord murmured, motioning lazily for the boy to come closer. Percy sighed in resignation and turned back toward the backpack, which now seemed heavier than ever. When did you say you would return to your kingdom? Marak asked, without looking directly at him. It's not a kingdom, it's an apartment. Sometimes you confuse me when you talk like that, Percy replied with a tired look. And, in a week. My expulsion finally begins, he added, forcing a fake smile. Then you'd better learn to use a sword right away. The number of flies has increased in recent days. You should start dealing with them yourself. Percy blinked, puzzled. Flies? He didn't understand at first, but soon a smile spread across his face. At last, he would learn to use a sword. A destiny unspun. A destiny unspun. What's wrong with you? Asked Marak, watching Percy with a stern look. The boy seemed distracted, his gaze lost, paying no attention to the training. Assuming that, as his master, he should intervene before forcing him to suffer for his lack of focus, he spoke. Nothing, Percy replied with a frown. Just a small annoyance. You want to learn to decapitate your enemies and take care of yourself. I suppose that's viable, murmured Marak, nodding with a hint of pride. What? No, Percy exclaimed immediately. I just heard some strange things from Professor Brunner and my friend, he added quickly. The horse and the goat, Marak muttered under his breath while pulling a bottle out of nowhere and taking a swig. He looked at it with disdain. This alcohol tastes like nothing but water, he added in disgust. Percy noticed that the bottle was whiskey. He couldn't understand his master. Sometimes Marak seemed to know absolutely everything about this world, as if nothing could surprise him, but other times he acted like someone ancient, unable to grasp the most basic aspects of common sense. Master, may I ask how old you are? Percy said, momentarily forgetting his previous worries. Master, Marak repeated with irritation. He disliked that title. He preferred to be called Lord. Come on, you're my teacher. Lord sounds weird, don't you think? It's better to call you master. In our culture, a master is someone who teaches, and that's what you're doing. Besides, I've also heard that's what servants call their superiors, Percy explained with a serious expression, trying to ease that strange way of addressing him. Master, Marak repeated thoughtfully. Finally, he nodded. I'll allow it. He paused briefly before adding, in years of this plane, I should be over 4,000. Why? He took another swig and tossed the bottle behind him. It vanished upon touching the ground, consumed by an ethereal spark. 4,000. Percy stared at him wide-eyed. You're basically a mummy, he blurted out reflexively, earning a harsh glare from Marak that made him shut up at once. I mean, you wear your age well. Blonde hair, stylish clothes, the beard is a bit patchy, but I think you're cool, master, Percy improvised quickly to save himself. If you're done fooling around, keep training before I throw you into a pit and force you to climb back out, Marak warned with seriousness. Here we go again, off to the city, Percy muttered as he climbed onto the bus. His eyes darted everywhere, as if searching for something invisible. What's wrong, Percy? Asked a nervous voice at his side. Grover looked at him with concern, noticing how his friend seemed to expect something to suddenly leap out at them. Nothing, Grover, what's wrong with you? Percy shot back, noticing how agitated his friend was. Nothing, Grover replied far too quickly, hurrying up onto the bus. Percy cast one last glance behind him, searching for the silhouette of his master. Marak had promised to stay close to continue his training. After all, he didn't want his first apprentice to die after only a few weeks of practice. But Percy didn't see him anywhere. The boy boarded, unaware that someone was lying casually against the roof of the bus, unnoticed by everyone else. This place is boring. I'm really starting to crave a fight with someone powerful. Only these weaklings keep showing up, Marak thought, lifting his eyes to the blue sky. That sky he hadn't seen in centuries, and which, since his arrival here, he had secretly come to enjoy. The bus rumbled on. Marak could feel Percy inside it, along with his strange goat companion. The demigod's growth was becoming more noticeable by the day. For an instant, an unfamiliar emotion stirred in him as he recalled their last training session, when Percy had managed to lift one of the chests. He didn't know what to call the feeling, and the uncertainty irritated him. Suddenly, the bus screeched to a halt. Marak straightened, leaving his thoughts behind. From his vantage point he saw the driver wrestling with something beneath the steering wheel. Passengers began to disembark slowly, murmuring in confusion. Percy and Grover were among them. With sharp eyes, Marak studied the surroundings. On one side of the road, there was nothing but maples and scattered trash. On the other, a fruit shop. And beneath its shade, 3 old women sat. One was knitting a sock, another its pear, and the one in the middle held a basket of yarn that glowed faintly with an unnatural light. Marak frowned. The crones seemed absorbed in their work, until their gazes lifted in unison and locked on Percy. The silence that followed was unsettling. Marak's scowl deepened even more. Then Percy heard his friend's trembling voice. Tell me they're not looking. They're not looking at you, right? Grover asked, pale and shaking all over. Looks like they are. Think the socks would fit me? Percy joked, trying to lighten the mood. This isn't funny, Perk. Not funny at all, Grover shot back, his fear so raw it erased any attempt at humor. Marak, however, was watching closely. One of the old women had produced an enormous pair of shears, forged of silver and gold. They were no ordinary tool. The runes and enchantments carved into the blades were unlike anything he had ever seen, even in the centuries of knowledge he had amassed in Apocrypha. The mere gleam of the instrument made Grover shrink back even further in terror, and even Marak, this time, seemed to pay close attention. Marak, for his part, smiled. With a simple gesture, 2 spectral swords materialized in his hands, and from his body emanated a bloodlust so brutal it fell upon the surroundings like a storm. The air grew heavy, and many passengers felt an irrational panic, a primal fear that forced them to run back inside the bus as if that metal box could protect them. For the first time, the old women raised their eyes toward Marak. Or rather, it seemed as though they had only just noticed him. Or perhaps what they saw confused them. Their gazes showed no hatred nor recognition, but genuine bewilderment. Percy, bewildered, looked around. That fear, he had felt it before. He didn't understand where it came from, but he recognized it. His friend, however, didn't give him time to think. Grover grabbed him by the arm and shoved him back onto the bus while screaming in terror. Marak smiled coldly, ready to strike if those women made a move. After all, there had to be a reason why the goat boy was so shaken by their presence. But the old women did not raise weapons against him. Instead, they began rummaging through the basket of yarn with growing urgency, pulling out thread after thread as if searching for something lost. Their hands trembled slightly, each movement more rushed than the last. Marak, disappointed, slowly lowered his spectral swords. It seemed they had no intention of fighting. Perhaps, he thought, the goat boy was nothing but a coward. His bloodlust faded little by little, dissipating like smoke in the air. Meanwhile, the driver, who had hidden himself under the engine, trembled without understanding what that terror had been that had paralyzed him seconds before. He shot up, yanked something from the motor in his desperation, and scrambled back to his seat with his face drenched in sweat. He started the bus and sped away roughly, as if escaping that place meant fleeing death itself. The passengers sighed in relief, glad to leave behind a scene of possible doom, never knowing what had truly happened. Only Marak remained calm, seated on the roof, his eyes fixed on the three old women still digging among the threads. One of them lifted her head and looked straight at him. It wasn't fear or anger in her eyes, but perplexity, as if his very existence were the strangest thing they had seen in centuries. The Dragonborn whispered words in the language of dragons and dissolved into mist, passing through the roof of the bus. His body rematerialized in the aisle, right beside Percy and Grover. He placed a hand on his chin and observed them in silence, expectant. "What's with those ladies? They're not like Mrs. Dodds, right?" Percy asked nervously. "Just tell me what you saw," Grover demanded, not taking his eyes off the window. The one in the middle pulled out a pair of shears, cut the thread. Then she raised her hand, made a gesture that looked like a cross, but it wasn't. It was something else, something older, Percy explained, increasingly uneasy. "You saw her cut the thread?" Grover asked, pale, his voice barely audible. "Yeah, why?" Percy felt a shiver run down his spine. "I wish this wasn't happening," Grover muttered, biting his fingers until they nearly bled. His voice was breaking. "I don't want it to be like last time, always in sixth, never make it past sixth," he repeated over and over, each time more distraught, as if trapped in a memory consuming him. "Grover, what the hell are you talking about?" Percy demanded, but his friend didn't answer, locked inside his own panic. "Let me walk you home. Promise me," Grover said with a seriousness that made him sound much older than he was. "Sure, but tell me something. Is this like a superstition or something?" Percy asked, trying to understand. Grover gave no reply. His silence was worse than any explanation. Percy turned toward him, his heart pounding. "The thread that old woman cut, does it mean someone is going to die?" he asked softly, with a painful intuition. Grover's expression said it all. The color had drained from his face, and his eyes were wet. For Marak, that was enough to understand the truth. The Dragonborn stared at Percy for a long moment, and without thinking, he lifted his hand, releasing a protective spell woven from multiple layers of magic. His instinct had acted before his mind. When he realized what he had done, he clicked his tongue and shook his head. "What nonsense. If he dies, it will be because he was too weak to call himself my apprentice," he said with disdain. But then, after a pause, he added calmly, "or I'll simply bring him back." With that, he dropped into the empty seat behind the two boys, pulling out another bottle of whiskey. Percy, on the verge of a panic attack from Grover's silence and the weight of everything that had happened, was startled by the sudden smell of alcohol. Strangely, that aroma eased him a little. His eyes scanned the surroundings in search of Marak, but, as always, he couldn't find him. The weight of mortals. "Percy, please wait for me. Just wait, I'll be right back. Don't leave without me," Grover repeated for what must have been the 100th time before running toward the station's bathroom. Meanwhile, Percy glanced around with a serious expression. After a brief moment of hesitation, he started walking, leaving his friend behind without much regret. He knew Grover wasn't much help. In fact, his presence only made him more nervous, since he never explained anything and always acted as if he were hiding something far too big. Percy even thought Grover might have an anxiety attack at any moment, which did nothing to ease his own unease in this confusing situation. Master, are you there? Percy asked, as though reaching for a lifeline. What is it? Replied a familiar voice. Percy turned instantly, and there stood Marak, as if he had been there all along. The boy froze for a moment, surprised, before blurting out. You have to teach me that. He spoke without thinking, almost reflexively. At the same time, he felt himself calming down, as if Marak's very presence gave him a sense of safety without him realizing it. Marak didn't answer such nonsense, already used to Percy's impulsive remarks since the day they met. Won't you wait for your goat friend? He asked calmly. I still don't get why you call him that. But no, I'm not going to wait. Just being near Grover makes me more nervous, Percy admitted, walking alongside his master. Marak, for his part, was observing the surroundings with interest. He immediately noticed how different everything was compared to the realms he knew. Yet, as he inhaled the city air, he felt disgusted by the smoke of vehicles and the pollution. Still, he couldn't help but think it was better than the rancid, oppressive, sulphurous stench of Apocrypha, mixed with the unbearable smell of rotting flesh and damp tentacles. It's truly fascinating how these realms have transformed into this, he muttered with genuine interest. They're even larger than many empires one once knew. You've seen empires firsthand? Percy asked with curiosity. Given his master's age, it didn't seem impossible. Yes, I destroyed a couple of them during my prime, Marak replied without the slightest hesitation. Percy stopped for a second, processing that revelation, before running a few steps to catch up again. So, where are we going? Marak asked naturally. I have to go home, see my mom. And of course, give her the jewels you gave me. Maybe then she won't have to work in that place anymore, or live in such a horrible apartment. It would be a dream if she could get away from that man too. Although, knowing him, the moment he sees money, he'll just waste it all gambling, Percy said, anger creeping into his voice. Marak cast him a sidelong glance. Your mood shifts far too quickly. For a warrior, that's not helpful. Percy bit his lip but stayed quiet, listening. It's true that sometimes anger, or even fear, can be powerful weapons to unleash your strength, Marak continued. But in many situations, the best choice is a cold, calculating mind. Fear too? Percy asked, a little confused. All emotions that arise within you can serve as fuel, Marak explained calmly. If you can't control them, then use them. Fear is a warning, a reminder of your weakness. But that doesn't mean you should stop. On the contrary, it means you must keep moving forward despite it. The limits are the ones we set ourselves, and when we break them, we grow. The next time, fear will be on a higher scale, showing you how much you've advanced. Percy listened intently, his eyes shining. Did you ever feel fear, Master? Of course not, Marak answered with pride. Not even when I slew every dragon and their priests, with the entire world against me. Not when my soul was declared a Daedric trophy. Not even when I lost to the current Dragonborn and was about to be cast into the void. I kept fighting with all my strength. A smile curved his lips, and at that moment the ground trembled faintly. People nearby, frightened, fled as if an earthquake were about to bring the place down. All right, Master, all right. Please calm down before a building collapses on us, Percy said quickly, trying to ease him. With just a smile, Marak could shake the very world around them. Well, mortal constructions would indeed be far too weak if they collapsed from something so trivial, he replied with complete composure. Still curious, Percy decided to risk another question. Master, what are Daedra? Marak's gaze hardened for an instant. You don't need to know right now. Just remember this. If you ever hear the call of one of them, especially the princes, run as fast as you can, and pray they never reach you. I doubt even the gods of this world could face some of them. Well, with a few it might not matter much, but with others, it would mean nothing but destruction and madness. With that said, he simply kept walking. Percy hurried to follow at his side, silent. Home sweet home, Percy muttered sarcastically as he got out of the taxi. He looked at the building in front of him with a mix of mockery and resignation. Marak observed the construction with interest. The apartment block rose enormously before his eyes, even larger than some of the castles in the holds he had once known. This is your home, quite impressive, considering you said you had no money," he remarked curiously. "No, master. This building isn't ours. My mother and I rent an apartment. In other words, we pay to live in one of these rooms," Percy explained. "Ah, I see. Then it is an inn," Marak concluded naturally. "Well, something like that," Percy admitted as he moved forward to open the front door. His eyes gleamed with a spark of excitement. "I'd like to introduce you to my mom. Though I doubt she'll believe me if I tell her you're a Viking over 4,000 years old." "Viking?" Marak asked, frowning. "I am a Nord, not a Viking." "Oh, sorry," Percy corrected himself at once, noticing how seriously his master defended his heritage. "Either way, I doubt she'll believe me. She always told me everything I saw was just my imagination, but now I finally have something to prove it. That man who followed me when I was a kid was a cyclops, and those strange dogs that hunted me that night looked like they were made of shadows." Marak regarded him calmly. "You're rather simple. Try spending your whole childhood seeing weird things and having nobody believe you," Percy shot back, though he quickly realized who he was talking to and lowered his voice more respectfully. Marak, however, wasn't offended. He came from a world where people spoke far more crudely. They advanced until they reached the apartment door. Even without entering, they could already hear the racket inside, men's voices laughing, mocking each other, and the loud blare of a television. Percy frowned with irritation and pushed the door open. The interior was a disaster. A group of men were drinking and gambling, surrounded by beer cans and food scraps scattered across the floor. The stench was suffocating, and a sports channel roared from the television. Among them was Gabe Ugliano, Percy's stepfather, a repulsive man who reeked nauseatingly, obese like a walrus without tusks, bald except for 3 useless hairs plastered to his head. "Well, look who finally showed up," Gabe sneered in his unpleasant, mocking tone the moment he saw Percy. "Where's my mom?" Percy demanded harshly, ignoring the insult. "Working," Gabe answered with irritation. Then he looked at him with calculating eyes. "You got money." "I don't," Percy shot back immediately, clearly annoyed. "HMPH, you took a taxi from the terminal, didn't you? So I bet you paid with a 20 and got $5 or $6 back. Whoever wants to live under this roof has to carry his own weight," Gabe said smugly, puffing out smoke from his cigar. "Isn't that right, Eddie?" The man named Eddie gave Percy a quick glance, tinged with pity, before muttering, "Come on, Gabe, the kid just got here. Am I right or not?" Gabe roared in anger. Eddie cowardly sank back into his bag of crackers, saying nothing. The other two didn't even bother to look, too focused on the television. "Great," Percy muttered in frustration, tossing a couple of bills onto the table. Then he turned, only to notice that Marak was no longer at his side. He looked around, startled, until he spotted him. His master was standing right behind Gabe. In an instant, he raised his hand and, bam! A dull crack echoed through the room. Gabe's head slammed against the table with brutal force, and a hand like an iron claw gripped his neck, squeezing him with contempt. "I've never seen something that stank so badly and looked even uglier than a skeever," Marak said coldly, his voice freezing the blood of everyone present. Only then did the men notice his presence. Gabe howled in pain, unable to break free from that inhuman strength. "Ah, WHWHO are you?" he stammered, his face pressed against the table. His friends jumped to their feet, ready to react. But it only took Marak lifting his gaze slightly toward them for them to stop in their tracks. The weight of his aura fell over the room like a crushing slab, leaving the men paralyzed and trembling. "Leave," he ordered calmly. The three bolted in terror, sprinting for the door without daring to look back. Percy, frozen for a moment at how fast it had all happened, felt a strange emotion rise in his chest. It wasn't fear, it was something else. Marak, meanwhile, still held Gabe with clear disgust. "What exactly is this thing?" he asked Percy, as if unsure whether he was dealing with a human, or something worse. The master at home, what is this thing?" Marak asked coldly, looking at Gabe with slight annoyance while his iron grip forced the man's neck down against the table. Gabe flailed helplessly, unable to free himself from the strength that seemed to crush him down to his very soul. "He's my stepfather, Gabe," Percy said as he steadied himself, surprised that his master had attacked without hesitation. Percy had always known Marak as calm, even when his words were harsh. Seeing him act so mercilessly reminded him he was standing before a warrior from another era. "Your father," Marak raised an eyebrow, a flicker of confusion in his tone. He studied Gabe closely, as if searching for hidden signs of power. A spectral sword appeared in his hand, ready to test whether this wretch was merely disguising his true strength. No, not my father. My stepfather, Percy clarified quickly, his brow furrowed, his gaze full of disgust toward Gabe. It means he's with my mother, but he isn't my real father. Those words alone saved Gabe's life. The sword vanished from Marak's hand, along with all his interest. Who the hell? Gabe began to mutter, but Marak silenced him with a simple gesture, flicking his hand as though shooing away an insect. Bam! Gabe's body slammed into the wall with a sickening thud before collapsing onto the floor. He let out nothing more than a weak, ooh, before fainting, most likely with more than a few broken bones. Percy couldn't help but feel a spark of satisfaction at the sight. He had waited far too long to see Gabe brought down. Meanwhile, Marak calmly examined the apartment. Small. And foul. Well, the first thing, I can't argue. But the second, that's Gabe's fault, Percy said, walking over and beginning to show him around. Marak's attention shifted to the television, which was showing an American football game. He had read much in the library, but seeing it in person was different. With curiosity, he stepped forward and, without hesitation, shoved his hands into the device, tearing it clean in half. Sparks burst in every direction, briefly lighting up the room. Percy froze, then sighed, placing a hand on his chest where a small pouch jingled faintly. He smiled wryly. Well, maybe we can buy a new one. The latest model. Inside the pouch were a few of the precious gems Marak had allowed him to keep. There were entire chests full of them, but Percy hadn't wanted to seem greedy, he had taken only 10. On the floor, Gabe still lay barely breathing, ignored by both of them. That was when the sound of the door opening echoed through the apartment. Percy's heart leapt. He turned quickly, holding his breath in anticipation. A woman with dark brown hair and gentle eyes stepped inside, her pace heavy with fatigue. She was still wearing her uniform from the candy shop. She set her bag and keys down on the small table, her face showing the exhaustion of the day. But the moment she saw Percy, her features lit up with pure joy. Percy, she exclaimed, rushing to embrace him. How you've grown since the last time. Percy held her tightly, as if that single embrace could erase everything bad, as if every moment of suffering had been worth it for this instant. It was the hug he needed most. Marak watched in silence. His eyes, however, revealed slight disappointment as he realized she was just a simple human. He concluded, as expected, that the true father had to be the god. Still, he remained standing, arms crossed, playing his role as master and guardian. Sally soon noticed another presence. Her eyes widened in surprise at the sight of Marak. Then they swept the room, the split television, the chaos of the apartment, and finally Gabe, lying on the floor, barely conscious. "Who are you?" she asked tensely, instinctively pushing Percy behind her. Her eyes were filled with distrust and a trace of fear, but also a spark of protectiveness. Marak narrowed his eyes. He recognized that glimmer. It wasn't the first time he'd seen someone react with courage in the face of overwhelming power. To him, it was almost amusing. "Mom, it's fine. He's my master, Marak," Percy said quickly. Sally stiffened even more at the word master. Her wary gaze never left Marak. The Nord was dressed in a black jacket with the word death stitched across the back, alongside a skeletal design. His thick beard and slightly long blonde hair gave him a rugged air. If not for the overwhelming aura of power radiating from him, he would have been considered handsome. But in that moment, he was more intimidating than anyone. "Maybe you won't believe me, but he's really a Nord, over 4,000 years old," Percy said with excitement, happy to finally have proof that he hadn't been crazy or imagining things all his life. Sally frowned for a brief moment, uncomfortable. She didn't relax, especially at hearing the word, Nord. She knew something about Percy's lineage, but none of it had anything to do with that. "Percy, dear, after such a long trip, I think what you need is a good bath. How about you go, and then we'll head to the cabins." "I'll have a word with your master," Sally said in a tone that was serious yet affectionate. Percy wanted to argue, but his mother's look silenced him instantly. With a sigh, he glanced at Marak, who, to his surprise, was sniffing an empty beer can before tossing it aside and grabbing a full one. "All right," Percy muttered, and hurried toward the bathroom. The living room fell silent. Only Sally and Marak remained. The Nord crushed the can in his hand with a metallic crunch, splitting it in two. Some of the liquid spilled onto the floor, and he tasted what remained with curiosity. A fleeting look of disgust crossed his face, yet he drank the rest anyway. "Who are you really, and why are you near my son?" Sally asked, her earlier warmth gone, her eyes now hard and sharp, the look of a mother hen protecting her chick. Marak studied her and, for the first time that night, allowed himself a faint smile, tinged with mockery. Still, he had accepted the boy as his student, and as such, he owed at least part of an explanation. In fact, I planned to kill him if he turned out to be the son of the one with the lightning," Marak said with absolute naturalness, as if he were sharing a simple memory. His words were harsh and cold, but showed not a trace of guilt. An ancient pride and unshakable certainty made him incapable of lying or hiding what he thought. But it seems he is not. His eyes fixed on Sally's, piercing her as though measuring even the smallest secret within. She shuddered with fear and shook her head. "You are mistaken about one thing," Marak continued. "I did not seek to remain near him. The boy himself begged me to be his master. After hearing lies since he was a child, driven to the brink of madness, he clung to me as the only one who opened his eyes." His voice grew heavier as he tore open another can of beer. He cracked it crudely, splitting it in half, spilling liquid everywhere, though not a single drop touched him. Sally trembled at his words. Guilt bit into her chest. She had tried to protect Percy, to give him normality, but she had never considered the weight of nobody believing what he truly saw. "I only accepted because I wanted to see how far he would go," Marak went on. "I have a slight interest in him. And who knows, maybe one day he'll end up fighting that fool of lightning. He is closer than I thought." Fear rang clearly in Sally's voice. "What do you mean?" "That one is searching for something, and he is blaming your son for it. They couldn't tell me much more, but even without words, I can feel it. His destiny is woven with threads far too great." He drained the can in a single gulp and tossed it aside. Sally looked at him, her face marked with worry. "How do I know you'll protect him?" "I won't protect him," Marak replied with absolute calm. "He is the first student of the first Dragonborn. He will control his own destiny. He will have the power to bring down that fool of lightning and stand above everyone, beneath no one, except his master." Before Sally could answer, Marak turned abruptly, as if sensing something. He raised a finger, and at its tip a small sphere of fire appeared. A moment later it shot through the wall, leaving a perfect hole. In the distance, an explosion thundered across the city. Those things multiply more than before. How bothersome." His words were casual, but his tone carried a shadow of satisfaction. "Perhaps I should start making the boy fight them." Sally understood instantly. "You told him what he is?" she asked seriously. "No, but all it takes is for him to grow just a little stronger, and they will come in greater numbers. It's inevitable." Marak turned his gaze toward Gabe, still lying unconscious on the floor. His eyes gleamed as though he had realized something. "I see," he muttered, before looking back at Sally. "You struggle greatly for your son," he remarked with almost cruel indifference, like someone evaluating an insect that refused to stop fighting. "How can I be sure you won't hurt him?" she pressed, her voice laden with fear and resolve. Marak looked at her as if she had asked the most absurd question in existence. "I could have killed him at any moment, and no one could have stopped me. I could destroy this place without anyone noticing. I could raise this entire country, and only when it was already too late would someone try to stop me. And believe me, I would be delighted to face anyone who thought they could." His voice grew darker, heavier, so powerful that the building itself began to tremble. Bottles rattled on the table, furniture creaked, and for a moment it seemed as if the very walls would crack apart. Then, suddenly, all went still. "To make it simple," he concluded, "I am not like those you think you know. I do not even come from this world. And now, I am simply enjoying my freedom." Sally remained silent, her heart clenched. She walked to the fridge, opened it, and pulled out a pack of beer. She opened one carefully, extended it toward Marak, and with a trembling voice said, "I don't trust you, but if you can keep my son safe, or at least make him strong enough to protect himself, I suppose I have no choice. Because not even I could do anything if those things attacked him." Marak accepted the can, surprised for a moment by the gesture. It was different from the ones he had tried before. He drank it, and this time his face showed a faint nod of approval. "Not bad." Then he looked at her with a calmness that chilled the blood. "Then, as a gift for being your son's master, I suppose I'll give you a bit of freedom." He raised his hand toward Gabe. On the floor, a a shadow began to open, from which dark tendrils erupted and wrapped around him. Gabe awoke just in time to groan, his eyes bulging in horror as he looked to Sally for help. But within seconds, he was dragged entirely into the darkness. I believe they call it hell here, Marak said, as if speaking of something trivial. I dislike opening portals to that place, they may draw unwanted visitors. But to send someone, I doubt they'll notice. With those words, the Nord vanished before Sally's eyes, as if he had never been there at all. The night the sky hesitated. The night the sky hesitated. Where's the master? Percy asked as he came out of the shower, towel drying his hair. He disappeared, Sally replied, her face serious, leaving no room for jokes. Ah, yeah, he likes to do that. Though I'm sure he's just around here somewhere, hiding, Percy said as he glanced around. He turned to his mother, his eyes glinting with excitement. Do you believe me now, Mom? Yes, Sally answered with a soft, though forced, smile. I always believed you, Percy. Her words caught the boy off guard. He opened his mouth to reply, but she calmly interrupted. Why don't you get ready? We're going to Montauk. Percy wanted to insist, but something deep inside warned him that something important was coming. He shut his mouth and began packing his things. A few minutes later, they loaded the bags into the car and set off. The trip ended at an old cabin near the beach. The wind whipped through the grass, the waves crashed hard, and the scent of salt hung in the air. As soon as they arrived, mother and son began feeding the seagulls with small pieces of blue bread, laughing as they strolled along the shore. Here, Sally and Percy seemed renewed. As if the beach were a sacred space, the deepest bond between them, a refuge where all they needed was each other. Meanwhile, Marak sat calmly atop the cabin's roof, watching the scene with mild boredom. Every so often, he would raise a hand, releasing an invisible bolt of power that disintegrated anything that tried to get too close. Yet his eyes remained fixed on the boy, observing with curiosity the child he had trained for the last month. Percy was happier than he had ever been, freed from the bitterness that had gnawed at him for years. Marak then turned his gaze to the sea. His eyes narrowed, as if they had locked with another gaze just as intense across the waves. The ocean churned, the wind howled stronger, and Marak's eyes burned gold. For a few seconds, an instinct of battle clashed on the horizon, as though two unseen forces were measuring one another in silence. The waves split in opposite directions, the air grew heavy. And then, it stopped. As if it had never happened. Marak smiled, intrigued, before shifting his eyes back to Percy and Sally, who were returning to the cabin to escape the sudden wind. Master, can't I enjoy a little vacation with my mom? Percy complained sadly, sitting on the sand at sunset. The sun was sinking slowly into the horizon, painting the sky in red and gold. No, Marak answered bluntly, tossing him a golden sword nearly half the boy's size. It was simple, without ornaments, but incredibly heavy. Percy caught it and, to his surprise, managed to lift it without too much effort, even with one hand. For a 12-year-old, it was incredible, a weapon that would challenge a grown man to lift with both hands, and yet Percy held it with relative ease. Great, Percy muttered with resignation. He knew what was coming, another beating. The training began. Percy threw all his strength into it, tried every trick and stance he knew, desperate to at least brush Marak's clothes. But his master barely seemed to pay attention. With a yawn, Marak moved his sword just slightly, batting away every strike as if they were weightless. Every so often, one casual sweep sent Percy rolling across the sand. After an hour and a half, the boy was covered in sand, aching from head to toe, and panting hard. He collapsed on his back, arms spread wide like a starfish, staring up at the night sky. The stars glittered above, and the waves roared with relentless force. Marak approached and leaned down, prodding him with the blunt tip of the sword. So this is what they call Spartan training, Percy groaned weakly, wincing at the little jabs. I said I'm a Nord, Marak retorted with a hint of annoyance. Then, without further warning, he shoved Percy into the sea with his foot. Percy burst back up, drenched and shivering. Master, can't you be a little nicer? You said I was your first student. He shouted from the water. What he didn't notice was that the fatigue, the pain, the aches, all vanished the moment he touched the sea. Marak studied him closely, his eyes narrowing. I see, he murmured, realizing something. A dangerous smile spread across his face. Percy looked down at his body, bewildered. The pain was gone. The sword no longer felt heavy, it was light, comfortable in his hand. The water surrounded him like a protective mantle, cool and invigorating. He lifted his gaze to tell his master, only to meet that smile. A smile that was anything but friendly. A cold shiver ran down his spine. That night, in front of the cabin, a bonfire burned. Sally waited in silence, fighting the urge to run out and stop the training. She had seen Percy get up again and again, each time with a fiercer look, throwing himself back at Marak. She couldn't bear to watch him suffer, but she also couldn't deny him that determination. In the end, she simply waited in the dark. Then Marak appeared, carrying what looked like a corpse in his hand. It was Percy, soaked, exhausted, hanging limp as if dead. The Nord dropped him roughly beside the fire. Percy hit the ground with an proving he was still alive. He barely lifted his head, eyes half shut, seeking his mother's gaze. "Hi, Mom, is there anything to eat?" Percy asked with a forced smile. He was exhausted, starving, but still tried to keep his voice light. Sally studied him silently. He had no bruises, no wounds, no trace of pain. Relief softened her features. She sighed, then smiled warmly before going to fetch him some food. Meanwhile, Marak had already vanished. A while later, after eating, Percy seemed to have regained a little energy. Now he sat beside his mother, drying his clothes near the fire that burned in front of the cabin. "Mom, what was my father like?" he suddenly asked, catching Sally off guard. She smiled faintly, touched with nostalgia. "Tall, handsome, and strong, but also gentle," she said. "You have his black hair, Percy, and also his green eyes." She plucked a blue candy from the bag and rolled it between her fingers. "He would have loved to see you, he would be so proud." Percy lowered his head, uncomfortable. Before Marak came into his life, he had never once felt like anyone could be proud of him. "How old was he?" Percy asked. "When he left." Sally stared into the flames, thoughtful. "He only spent one summer with me. Right here, in this cabin." "But, did he know me as a baby?" Percy insisted, as if trying to confirm a memory. "No, sweetheart, he knew I was pregnant, but he never saw you. He had to leave before you were born." Her voice cracked slightly, and she lowered her gaze. Percy frowned, as though trying to piece together something important. Anger stirred in him, but he remembered what Marak had told him: "Control your emotions, don't let them control you." He took a deep breath, and his expression turned cold, analytical. "He's special, isn't he? Like Marak. After all, Master said he was searching for someone who attacked him, and if he confused my destiny with his, then it must mean my dad is like that guy." Sally looked at him in surprise, worry flickering across her face. But Marak's words echoed in her mind, that her overprotection was damaging her son's psyche. She couldn't keep hiding everything. "That's right, Percy, he's special, much more than you imagine. But he's different from Marak. The truth is, I don't even know what Marak is. But your father, and the man who fought him, I'm sure they are the same." Percy listened intently, his eyes shining with determination. "That's why you're special too," Sally continued. "And that puts you in danger. Knowing it too soon would be worse. That's why I didn't tell you until." "Until what?" Percy asked, frowning. "Until you were ready, or until you had the necessary protection," she answered. "There's a place where children like you go, Percy. Your father told me that I should send you there. But even there, you're more special than most." Percy blinked, confused. "So what am I then? The son of a god or something?" he asked with a nervous smile, trying to break the heavy air. Sally froze. She didn't answer. "Wait, are you serious?" Percy shot to his feet. It was as if something had awakened, or rather, as if Percy had suddenly become visible to something else. Before he could press further, a guttural roar rumbled in the distance. "Bro!" Sally stiffened, filled with fear. She rushed to Percy, ready to grab him and run. Several screams erupted all around, and soon the sound of footsteps multiplied in the darkness. The beach seemed surrounded, even the waves surged violently, and in the night dozens of red eyes began glowing like torches, slowly closing in. The wind howled, lightning split the sky, and the bonfire in front of the cabin was snuffed out at once. "Oh no," Sally muttered gravely, fear etched on her face. Percy's heart pounded in his chest. He felt the air grow heavy, danger closing in. He spotted the golden sword lying in the sand and, without thinking, ran to grab it. Though blunt, he held it firmly. He was ready for whatever came. Sally trembled, not for herself, but for how she would protect her son. "I've never seen anything like this," said a calm voice. Percy's fear evaporated like smoke, replaced by sudden calm. He turned, and there stood Marak, beside the extinguished fire, crushing a blue candy between his fingers. "I didn't know mortals ate poisonous things," he remarked with genuine curiosity. "Perhaps I should start using stronger poisons in your meals, to increase your resistance." Percy realized in that instant that the most dangerous thing there wasn't the creatures closing in, but the man he called master. Marak lifted his gaze to the sky, then to the surroundings. He frowned slightly and snapped his fingers. What Percy saw next defied all logic. A whirlwind of fire erupted around them, expanding in a vast ring of destruction that spread for kilometers. Sand, air, and flame surged in a devastating roar. The glowing eyes rushing toward them barely had time to scream before they were consumed. A few tried to escape, but remained only as burning shadows, bellowing like doomed beasts before collapsing into silence. Percy managed to catch sight of one shadow still fleeing, half engulfed in flames, an enormous cow-like creature bolting into the distance. Even the sky fell silent, as if holding its breath, but only for an instant. The clouds began to spiral above the cabin, condensing into a dark eye. The sharp smell of ozone filled the air. High above, a spear of light was forming, drawing in lightning that coiled toward a single point, directly above Percy and Sally. The sky was preparing to strike again. Marak smiled, his eyes blazing gold, as though a legion of dragons took shape behind his back within his aura. His power rose like an ancient tide, glowing runes surfaced across his skin, and his stance shifted just enough to announce that he would answer the next heartbeat. From the ocean came another response. The sea arched inward, as if inhaling. Waves rose into jagged crests, and in the depths something trembled with force, aligning not with Marak, but with that which he had protected. The water claimed its place at Percy's side. Sky, sea, and Marak were held taut in the same steel thread, each force brimming with fury in an endless second. The wind surged, the sand quaked, and the smoldering ring of Marak's fire marked the ground zero. The lightning above finished forming, ready to fall. Marak was about to speak. The sea roared, and then the sky hesitated. For one eternal moment, it was as if it weighed the cost of unleashing its full wrath here. Perhaps out of caution for the sea, perhaps for what both protected, or perhaps as a silent warning that doing so would mean total war, now with a player who could not be read. At last, the lightning struck, but not on them. It crashed down on the surroundings with deafening violence, splitting trees, hurling up columns of sand, and shaking the coast beneath a rain of fiery bolts. The earth trembled, and chaos consumed everything around them. Sally shielded Percy with her body, shuddering at the explosive thunder that rained down like a storm of ruin. And yet, at the center of it all, Percy, Sally, and Marak remained untouched. Marak smiled, satisfied, as though he had just won an invisible contest of wills. The sea roared again, deep and proud. The sky, for its part, rumbled with thunder that sounded like a promise. This wasn't over. 3 comments 0 vote. The first trial. The first trial. After that battle that never came to be, a clash of forces that neither Sally nor Percy could truly comprehend, Marak vanished once again without offering any explanation, leaving Percy more confused than he could bear. The storm that had roared above them slowly unraveled, forcing mother and son to retreat into the cabin. Despite everything, the old construction remained intact. The surroundings were scorched, burned by fire and marked by lightning strikes, yet not a single splinter of the cabin had been harmed. That in itself was a mystery, as if someone had deliberately ensured its preservation for decades, and Percy knew this time it hadn't been Marak. Percy remained tense, replaying in his head what he had just witnessed. Sally, quieter than ever, seemed to accept something as she watched her son. "Percy, get some rest. Tomorrow, we need to talk about something important," she said firmly before retreating to her room. The boy looked at her in silence and went to his own. It took him a long time to fall asleep, but when he finally did, a strange dream consumed him. An enormous eagle and a massive white horse fought on the beach, surrounded by the storm. The eagle swooped down with talons and beak, while the horse countered with kicks and charges. They wounded each other endlessly, locked in savage combat. Percy trembled with fear, desperate for them to stop. But when he tried to shout, he noticed another presence on the shore, watching with interest. Black scales, golden eyes, a silhouette that needed no introduction. A dragon, and it looked ready to intervene, which could only mean even greater destruction. "No!" Percy screamed, bolting upright. His breath came in gasps. He glanced toward the window and saw the storm raging on the beach, but no eagle, no horse, no dragon. That was when he heard frantic knocks at the door and a desperate voice. "Please, open up." Sally stepped out in her nightgown, tired but alert, and opened the door. Grover stumbled inside, drenched, trembling with fear. The satyr had clearly seen the devastation around the cabin, and his face betrayed all his panic. Seeing Sally and Percy safe, he released a long sigh of relief. Percy stared at him, eyes wide. "I've been searching for you all night. What were you thinking, running off without me?" Grover scolded. But Percy didn't answer. His eyes dropped slowly to Grover's legs, where there were no feet, only hooves. He clutched his head with both hands, incredulous, and muttered. "So that's why Master kept calling you, the goat boy." Grover had no time to react. His eyes bulged with fear, his voice breaking. They're coming. So many, far too many." A chill ran down Sally's spine. Even if she trusted that Marak had destroyed a number of them, she understood now that what they had faced before had only been the beginning. They couldn't wait any longer. "Percy, let's go," she ordered firmly, running toward the car. Grover rushed after her, his hooves clattering against the ground. Percy followed, still confused, though inside he carried a certainty that soothed him. As long as his master was there, nothing could harm him. That calm, trusting gaze did not go unnoticed by Marak. From the shoreline, the Nord stood with arms crossed, his aura pressing down like an invisible wall. He watched them leave the cabin, his brow furrowing ever so slightly, as if something about the situation displeased him. The car rolled down the road without obstacles. Grover, anxious, couldn't understand why they weren't being attacked. He had seen hordes approaching, but now they had vanished without a trace. Percy, on the other hand, wore a faint smile, confident that everything was under control. When they reached a certain point in the forest, Grover turned to explain something to Sally. But mid-sentence, he collapsed unconscious, hitting the ground with a thud. Percy whipped his head around and saw him. Marak was there, standing among the trees, his gaze fixed and merciless. "Master, why did you attack Grover?" Percy asked, startled. "He is noisy," Marak replied with chilling calm. Then he extended his hand and tossed something. Percy caught it, a different sword this time. Short, dark-bladed, light in weight, with a slender hilt etched with runes he didn't recognize. The weapon felt comfortable, as though it had been forged just for him. "It seems you're relying too much on me always being there to protect you." "Perhaps that is my mistake," Marak said seriously, his eyes gleaming in the shadows. Sally took a step forward, alarm written on her face, about to protest. "Moo!" A deep bellow echoed in the distance, accompanied by the cracking of trees as something massive forced its way through. "You are mistaken about something," Marak continued firmly, his gaze never leaving the boy. "I do not train someone so they depend on me. I train them so they learn to save their own life." Percy turned toward the sound. From between the trees emerged a monstrous silhouette, a bipedal beast with colossal muscles and dark fur. Two enormous horns jutted from its skull, and half its body was still scarred with fresh burns. Percy recognized it instantly. It was the sole creature that had survived Marak's ring of fire. The Nord stepped back, and his voice rang out like a sentence carved into stone. "From now on, your life depends on you." And then he vanished like mist at dawn, leaving Percy standing alone before the beast. The boy's nerves surged all over again. The Minotaur fixed its empty eyes on him, exhaling foul breath as it stomped the ground with brute force. "Phew," the creature snorted before charging forward like a raging bull. "Percy!" Sally screamed in panic, desperate to throw herself in front of her son. But Percy, driven by an instinct he couldn't explain, shoved his mother aside and rolled in the opposite direction. Everything seemed slower, as if his body had acted before his mind. The Minotaur thundered past, missing both of them. It skidded to a halt, snorting, then turned its burning gaze toward Percy. The boy was drenched in cold sweat, trembling, yet he still raised the dark sword his master had given him. Sally tried to rise from the ground, but Percy shouted with a seriousness she had never seen in him before. "Don't interfere, Mom. The master is right, I'm his student. I've trained until now, I can do this." The words were not only for her, they were for himself as well. The Minotaur charged again, this time raising a massive fist to crush him. Percy rolled once more, and the blow struck the earth with such force that the ground shook and deep cracks split open beneath it. Percy did not hesitate. He leapt, higher than any normal human could ever hope to, and with both hands gripping the sword above his head, he brought it down with all his strength. The blade sliced through the Minotaur from skull to chest as though it were cutting through hot butter. One strike, one clean, devastating movement. The beast's body dissolved into black dust, and its horn rolled across the earth. Percy stood frozen, motionless, his mouth slightly agape. He couldn't believe how easy it had been. His eyes dropped to his hands and the sword still clutched in one of them. Sally, just as astonished, understood instantly. Marak had forced Percy to face the monster alone because he knew his student was far stronger than he realized. Percy had never noticed. After all, his only sparring partner had been Marak, someone so overwhelmingly powerful and skilled that hurting him was impossible. But now, against a true enemy, Percy's growth was undeniable. From the wind came a voice, deep and unyielding, echoing through the forest like a command carved in stone. From now on, I will not fight for you. You can do it yourself. At dawn, prepare for the next phase of training. Percy searched around, looking for his master, but found only silence. Even so, a new pride burned in his chest, a flame he couldn't put out. Sally, meanwhile, dropped to the ground, smiling through tears. Her son, he now had the strength to protect himself. Ugh, what happened? Grover murmured, waking with a pain in his neck, dazed and confused. Percy bent to pick up the fallen horn of the Minotaur, holding it firmly as he glanced calmly at his friend. Looks like a branch fell and hit you, he said with a simple smile. Grover's eyes widened. He noticed the horn in Percy's hand, the sword, and then the ground beside them, where the imprint of a massive fist still scarred the earth. It was as if all the pieces were falling into place. The time for farewell came. Percy hugged his mother tightly, promising that once he finished at camp, he would return to her. Sally, her eyes wet with tears, clung to him as if she wanted to engrave the moment into eternity. Parting hurt, but she was proud. Her little boy was ready to take his next step. With a heavy heart, she got into the car and began the drive back. Sadness mingled with relief. Percy was in a safe place now, under the watch of his master. As she drove along the dark road, she was startled to see an older woman standing by the side, hitchhiking. Compassion moved her, and Sally slowed down, stopping the car. The woman approached with a grateful smile. She had graying hair, a stern gaze, and a noble bearing beneath a dark overcoat. "Thank you, I thought no one would stop," she said in a grave tone. "Don't worry, I wouldn't want something bad to happen to you in the middle of the night," Sally replied kindly, inviting her to take the passenger seat. The woman smiled faintly, though there was something strange in the curve of her lips. "Sally Jackson," Sally introduced herself politely. "You can call me Mrs. Dodds," the woman replied. If Percy had been there, he would have recognized her instantly. To him, she was no stranger, she was his old math teacher. Or rather, the first monster that had ever attacked him, the very harpy Marak had driven to the edge of despair, forcing her to flee by nearly taking her own life. 2 comments 0 vote. The gaze of gods, the gaze of gods. Marak saw Percy enter with Grover, who followed him in confusion, while he remained with his arms crossed, staring straight ahead, directly through the trees. That was when another gaze fell upon him. Marak's battle instinct began to rise slowly, like a current growing into a tidal wave capable of shaking the trees around him. But at the same time, a battle instinct of equal strength emanated from the other side of the camp. An excited smile formed on Marak's lips. His eyes shifted, not like human eyes, but like those of a dragon, vertical, green, and able to pierce through every trunk and leaf. There he saw him, a chubby man, wearing a wrinkled Hawaiian shirt, shorts, and holding a can of Diet Coke in his hand. His careless appearance contrasted with the deadly look he held toward Marak, as if the two were staring directly at each other. For any camper, this would have been impossible to believe. Their careless and annoying director was showing a strange face, serious, almost threatening. Around the camp, the vines began to move on their own, preparing to raise a defensive barrier. "You know, although I doubt you could lose against him, it's not as if you could win either. Not easily. Killing him is impossible. The only thing you'd accomplish is destroying everything around you and putting those demigods in danger. And he will have to protect them, so I suppose you don't want to harm your own student either." The calm voice came from behind Marak. The Dragonborn moved one of his spectral blades slightly, as if he already knew who was speaking. He didn't turn around, keeping his gaze fixed on the man across from him. "What do you want?" he asked, recognizing the man with the eye patch, the same one who had given him information about the gods, the demigods, and about this strange world, so different from his own and crowded with deities. "Well, I thought you might be interested in accepting a mission from a friend of mine." The calm smile never left his face. "I'm not interested." Marak's response was immediate. "Oh, really?" The man raised an eyebrow and sighed. "What a shame. I suppose I'll have to find someone else to deal with those dragons." Marak's killing intent stopped pressing toward the camp, shifting slowly toward the man instead. He said nothing, but his stare was fixed. The man smiled calmly. "I'm not asking you to join any pantheon. This benefits us both. You clean up our problems little by little, and in return, you gain more power. That's how you see the world, isn't it? After all, you still carry all those dragon souls inside you." Marak narrowed his eyes. "And what do you gain?" he asked with distrust. After all, he didn't want things to end like last time. "Me." The man seemed to think for a moment, lifting his gaze to the stars before returning it to Marak. "You are not bound to any destiny, and that alters the threads of those connected to you. Like that boy you accepted as a disciple. That's why even Zeus hesitates to attack you. He doesn't know what would happen if he did. And there's something else you still don't fully understand." A torrent of battle instinct erupted from him, so overwhelming that even Marak, who had never known defeat except at the hands of Valak and that young Dragonborn, felt cornered. His pride, forged through centuries of victories and study in Apocrypha, trembled for the first time in a long while. And yet, he didn't lower his guard. 2 spectral swords appeared in his hands. A dozen spells cloaked his body instantly, defenses, reinforcements, enhancements of damage. And then, Mulqah dive. The murmur echoed through every corner of the forest like thunder. His body transformed. Black wings like the night spread from his back, scales covered his arms, sharp claws and fangs gleamed in the dim light. His green eyes, bright and intense like a dragon's, shone as his body surged with strength. On the other side, the god protecting the camp opened his eyes in seriousness. Signals spread immediately. Reinforced barriers, the ground shaking with roots, magic swirling around each cabin. The demigods felt as if the weight of the world had fallen on them and fled in terror to their shelters. Percy, who was following Grover to a small wooden cabin with an old fan, stopped. He felt the pressure crash onto his shoulders and frowned. "Master," he murmured uneasily. Grover was trembling. "Percy, we have to hide. Mr. D will protect us." Percy clenched his teeth, worried, but kept moving. Meanwhile, Marak stood before the man with the eye patch. Not even with his transformation and all his enhancements had he managed to surpass that presence. "Fascinating," said the man. "You have no divinity within you, and yet your power far exceeds that of a minor god. You could even rival some Olympians. Killing them, of course, is another matter. And much less could you face Zeus, or me." A golden spear appeared in his hand. The power surged suddenly, suffocating, and then vanished as if nothing had happened. "Many dragons in this world carry divinities stronger than several gods. I like your style, Marak. You remind me of my son, a fool who keeps fighting even knowing he's going to lose." He turned his back, as if he had no fear of being attacked. Then Marak felt gazes, not faces or names, only presences, dozens of them. Most were empty, as if watching a stone by the river. Only a few carried true emotion. One, furious, filled with rancor, like a storm that wanted to destroy him, but defensive at the same time. Another, sharp and cold, like an eye that examined everything, with a faint spark of interest. A third, warm, almost grateful. And then it came. A gaze that devoured the others, possessive, as if unwilling to share him with anyone else, as if the very instant it saw him it had already declared him its own. And as that gaze appeared, all the others vanished quickly. One by one. Marak's body began to return to normal while his brow remained furrowed. The very air trembled until that last presence disappeared. The man with the eye patch looked at him again, his chin resting on one hand. "Just as I thought," he murmured seriously. "You want to be above everyone and beneath no one, don't you? Then accept these missions. You'll help certain gods with their problems, and in return, you'll gain power from those dragons. Nothing to lose, and everyone wins." He paused and smiled. "Oh, I almost forgot. I didn't introduce myself. My fault. I tend to forget since I don't usually need to. Everyone recognizes me the moment I appear, even if they don't belong to my pantheon. I am Odin, father of all. It's a pleasure, Merak, Dragonborn, champion of Akatosh. Odin spoke with a welcoming smile. Merak looked at him seriously. To say he wasn't surprised that Odin had recognized the dragon god would have been a lie. After all, this plane didn't even seem to have the slightest connection to his own. Merak stared at Odin for a moment before speaking. I still want to fight you. Odin smiled. How about this? Fight my son. He controls lightning and is known as the god of war. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. Fine. Merak lowered his gaze toward the camp, protected by vines and a glowing barrier. Magic vibrated in the air, traps deployed with precision as if waiting for a signal to activate. A small golden sphere left his hand, floating silently before turning into a letter that flew in the direction where Percy had disappeared. After all, he had said he would begin the second part of the training, but now it seemed he would be absent for a couple of days. Even so, he made sure to leave him clear instructions on how to proceed without his supervision, along with a subtle threat: if, by the time he returned, Percy hadn't reached the level he expected, he'd better be prepared to suffer. With that done, he turned around and followed Odin. Meanwhile, Percy had reached the interior of the camp, which remained in a defensive state. He looked around cautiously. Some cabins were lit with torches that lined the stone paths, and hardly anyone was outside. Most had taken shelter in silence, convinced that someone was about to attack. By his side walked Grover and a young girl who had stepped out of the cabin earlier, Annabeth. She didn't take her eyes off Percy, watching him with an almost obsessive interest, while he tried to avoid her gaze, too worried about his master's absence. Suddenly, a letter of light descended slowly and landed in his hands. What's that, Percy? Grover asked nervously. He knew better than anyone that Percy had no family or acquaintances capable of sending him magical messages, or at least that's what he thought. The truth was, he knew nothing of reality. Percy's master was a Nord over 4,000 years old, who had been training him for more than a month, ever since that day Mrs. Dodds had attacked him. Percy didn't respond. He had seen Merak use magic a couple of times, though he always told him he had to master the sword first before learning anything else. Still, Percy was sure the letter could only have come from him. He opened it cautiously, though the fear in his chest grew with every second. And when he read the words, he froze, wishing he had never read them. What is it? Annabeth asked, refusing to leave his side. Percy folded the letter carefully and slipped it into his pocket as if nothing had happened, ignoring the questions from his friend and the girl he had just met. Instead, he smiled and pretended to be calm, looking at the camp with forced cheer. Looks like a good place for a summer camp. I wonder if it'll be fun, he said with a forced smile, while around him people hurried about, setting up barricades and reinforcing defenses as if preparing for a war. Percy, however, seemed determined to ignore reality with all his strength. 5 comments 0 vote. Souls and recognition. Souls and recognition. Deep within a European mountain, surrounded by thick forests and trees that seemed to whisper ancient secrets, there was a cave. Not just any cave. Anyone who had ever studied old scrolls or followed legends would recognize it. The moment one stepped inside, the place shone with overflowing riches. Mountains of gold and jewels lay piled alongside corroded weapons and rusted armor, the remains of warriors who had dared to claim the treasure, and who had perished under the fury of its guardian. A fearsome being, a dragon with jaws full of fangs, capable of breathing fire that reduced everything in its path to ashes. Its wings had carried it high into the skies, and its scales, harder than any steel, made it nearly impenetrable. Now, that beast lay on the ground, dead, and on its back, seated with absolute calm, was a man. The dragon's soul, still pulsing, slipped free of the corpse. It was immediately absorbed by the man, done so naturally, as if he were simply breathing. His eyes turned reptilian for a brief moment, and when he exhaled, a sigh filled with power echoed through the cave. Merak, the first Dragonborn. This was far too easy, he muttered with disdain. The third one this week, and at most they barely reached the level of venerable dragons. His voice dripped with mockery. He jumped down from the carcass and glanced around. The gold didn't catch his attention. What truly interested him were the minerals infused with magic, the same ones requested by a strange blacksmith who, bound by ancient treaties, could not strike down dragons himself. Merak gathered them and tossed them into the enchanted bag he had been given, a sack with no bottom that devoured everything thrown into it. Then he summoned a spectral sword. With the calm precision of a seasoned craftsman, he began to skin the dragon. His cuts were smooth, exact, professional. The task took hours, longer than the battle itself. He removed the hide, bones, even the flesh, which he diced into cubes before storing away. The brat will need more nutrients, he muttered without realizing. Once the words left his mouth, he frowned, irritated at himself for thinking of someone other than him. On his way out, he stopped. He turned to look back at the treasure. Even if it didn't interest him, it was technically his now, and he wouldn't allow anyone to take it without his permission. He raised a hand, and dark curses spilled across the cave, wrapping around the gold, the jewels, and even the walls. Only then did he turn and leave. Outside, 3 men were waiting. The first, upon seeing him, smiled eagerly. "Well, did you find them, the minerals?" he asked with excitement. Merak tossed the raw fragments at him. The man caught them with fascination, marveling at how they glowed strangely even before being smelted. The second man hardly paid attention. He was busy eyeing the trees, sketching plans as if already imagining projects that would use the wood. The third remained seated, calm. When he finally stood, a hammer hung from his belt, and his aura was as restrained as it was powerful. "Looks like you finished. Thank you. We couldn't touch them ourselves. We tried sending others but, well, I'm sure you saw what became of them. That was the last deposit of that mineral. Thanks." Merak only grunted and began to leave. "Wait," the blacksmith stopped him. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed Merak a can of beer. Its name was strange, and the metal of the container seemed unlike any other. "A gift. I brewed it myself." Merak looked at the can, caught it with little interest, and continued walking. Moments later, he vanished in a flash of teleportation magic. He reappeared in the United States, right in front of the imposing Hotel Valhalla. As he crossed the doors, a man with a white beard was waiting with a smile. "Odin. So, you finished. Well done, you really are a machine. Are you sure you don't want to join our pantheon? We're practically from the same mythology," he said, as always trying to recruit him. "Pass," Merak replied calmly. "A shame. Well, for now I don't have any missions for you. But I'm sure the other gods have already heard of your work. It's only a matter of time before you get a call. Sorry for pulling you away from your student this week." Odin's smile grew wider. "You can go back, I'll summon you when needed." "For?" Merak asked seriously. "Right, you had something to settle with him." Odin pointed toward a side door. "That way, so they won't destroy my hotel again." Merak walked in that direction with full confidence. Meanwhile, Odin turned his gaze toward the street. Through the door, he could see a man staring at both him and Merak with a deep frown before vanishing into thin air. "I wonder if giant serpents might also carry dragon souls," Odin murmured grimly. Then he sighed and turned away. He had to prepare more PowerPoint slides for his Einherjar's training. Ragnarok was drawing near, and every detail mattered. If he could count on Merak's help, the man who could alter fates, then perhaps even the end of the world could change. At the reception desk, a Valkyrie watched the door Merak had entered. The frame trembled, and from within came a roar of clashing blows and excited laughter. Clank. Percy stood by the river, surrounded by more than 5 campers attacking him without pause. His black sword moved with fluidity, like a natural extension of his body. He blocked, deflected, countered, each movement was precise, versatile, and despite the pressure, he seemed to have everything under control. Chiron and the director watched from a nearby mound. Even other campers had stopped to look, surprised by how Percy dominated the fight. It looked as if even if 10 more joined in, the outcome wouldn't change much. "What do you think?" the director asked with a serious look. "He couldn't have learned that on his own," Chiron replied, equally serious. "Even if he inherited it, it's too much. Someone has been training him, someone professional. And Percy is holding back." It was obvious. He defended himself without using the true edge of his sword, as if he knew that with a single cut he could destroy any enemy weapon. A thrust came directly at his head. Percy merely tilted his neck, dodging calmly, and with the blunt side of his sword struck his attacker across the face. The boy collapsed to the ground, nose bleeding. From the side, Clarice, daughter of Ares, god of war, charged with her spear. Percy ducked, letting the tip pass over him, and at the same time raised his sword to block another strike. Then he turned and delivered a brutal kick to the chest of the attacker, sending her flying across the sand. Clarice's fury ignited at seeing her companions fall. She began to move her spear faster, with lethal precision, aiming directly at Percy's vital points. He slid to the side and raised his knee, knocking the spear upward. The imbalance was enough. Percy spun and landed a kick that hurled Clarice several meters away, though she managed to use the shaft of her weapon as a shield at the last second. Percy's movements weren't limited to his sword. Every muscle in his body responded with total control, as if all of him had been forged for combat. After all, Mirac had trained him for this long before teaching him to wield a blade. "Fools, surround him," Clarice shouted angrily. Her allies hesitated. They had seen Percy's superhuman strength, and none wanted to be the next to test it. Finally, with a roar, they rushed in to encircle him. Percy was sweating now, but he didn't yield. Ever since Annabeth had put him in the vanguard, or rather, as a distraction, he hadn't stopped receiving attacks. And of course, Percy knew this was all Clarice's revenge for what happened in the bathrooms, when he had used the toilet water against her. "Being popular isn't as fun as I thought," Percy muttered with self-mockery, deflecting 3 consecutive attacks. A kick to the chest of one, then a jump and a double kick to 2 more, and suddenly, he felt it. Clarice's spear shot straight toward his face. Percy raised his free hand and caught it just before it reached him. A spark of electricity surged through his arm. The spear lit up, electrocuting his hand. Percy released it immediately, and the tip kept going, aiming at his left eye. He shifted to the side, irritated now, and for the first time wielded in earnest the sword his master had given him. With a downward slash, he cut the spear as if it were butter. The other campers attacked him all at once, and Percy spun, slicing their weapons apart one by one as though they were dry branches. His next move was a Spartan kick, this time charged with anger. Clarice, still in shock at seeing the spear her father had given her destroyed, had no time to react. The blow launched her across several trees before she hit the ground unconscious, probably with broken bones. "Oh, damn," Percy froze, realizing he had gone too far. He had assumed the other demigods were as resistant as he was, but they weren't. The remaining opponents glanced at their broken weapons, then at the unconscious Clarice, and dropped their arms, raising their hands in surrender just as Percy's team arrived with the captured flag. Yes, this had only been a game of capture the flag at Camp Halfblood. A game with real weapons, real blows, almost deadly, but a game nonetheless. Clarice's allies quickly ran to her, carrying her on a stretcher toward the infirmary. Meanwhile, Percy's teammates surrounded him with cries of triumph. They lifted him onto their shoulders, celebrating that thanks to him they had won the match. Percy had held off most of the enemy forces on his own, taking all the pressure. Annabeth, smiling, pointed at the river. Percy and the others understood instantly. With joy, they all jumped into the water with him, celebrating their victory. That was when they saw it. The reflection on the surface rose into the air, a shining trident. The son of Poseidon had been recognized. Percy Jackson. 2 comments 0 vote. The master arrives PT1. The master arrives PT1. Annoyed, filled with anger, contempt, and resentment. All those emotions came solely from Percy, while everyone else looked at him strangely. To many he seemed like some newly discovered celebrity, to others, someone carrying a contagious disease they should avoid. He couldn't even eat in peace at the camp's dining hall before being surrounded by stares of every kind. But what irritated him the most was his father. That's right, now he finally knew who his father really was. And no, it wasn't the sarcastic and grumpy camp director, the one who had tried to trick him into bringing him alcohol the very first time they met. From that moment on, Percy had decided it was best to stay far away from that man. His teacher was something else. Full-mouthed, a drunk, yes, but he would never deceive him that way. He had never truly treated him badly, though sometimes he threatened punishments if Percy didn't finish his training. Percy had even tested those limits several times, almost like a masochist trying to see how far it would go. And even though he was never punished, Percy ended up trusting Mirac so much that he could be considered the father figure he had never had. Because Gabe, of course, didn't count as a father. And Mirac, though harsh and distant, treated him as a true student. Once, Percy had overheard a classmate say that a teacher is a father for life. Maybe that's why, every time Percy tested Mirac to see if he was truly a bad person, all he ever got in return were words of reproach which, if looked at from another angle, were disguised encouragement. Brutal encouragement, Nordic encouragement. Of course, Mirac would be offended if someone confused him with a simple Viking, but he was never disappointed. To him, all mortals were weak. He didn't expect anything extraordinary from Percy. And yet, he still accepted his effort. For a boy who had never had a father, that meant more than anything. This is annoying, Percy muttered abruptly, leaving his food on the plate and standing up sharply. He walked toward his cabin, the one that belonged solely to him. The children of the Big Three weren't supposed to exist, yet Poseidon had a cabin, and it stood empty. He thought he would finally have some peace. He was wrong. Grover came running to fetch him. He had been summoned to the big house. There, two figures awaited him, both wanting to have a serious conversation. Mr. Brunner, better said, Chiron, the activities director of what Percy considered a terrible camp, and the OHSO, adorable and charismatic, director, better known as Mr. D. Of course, pure sarcasm. Percy, can we speak with you? Asked Chiron, while Mr. D wore that ever-present annoyed expression, his eyes scanning the surroundings with suspicious vigilance, as if making sure no one else was nearby. Since you arrived, we've noticed your swordsmanship, your stamina, even systematic training that would normally take years for a camper to develop, Chiron said calmly, trying to ease into the subject. Percy, where did you learn that? The last time I saw you, you weren't like this. Percy frowned. The last time, you mean when you pretended to be my teacher, giving me support only to later tell me I didn't belong here? When you lied straight to my face while I was losing my mind after being attacked? While laughing at me behind my back? Percy spat out, unable to keep it bottled up any longer. He had always wanted to say it. He clearly remembered when Mrs. Dodds attacked him, he had heard Mr. Brunner's voice, handing him that bronze sword. A sword Percy had returned, because he didn't need it. That professor, who now revealed himself as a trainer of demigods, had left a 12-year-old boy to face a monster without any clue of what was going on. He tossed him a weapon and walked away. What would have happened if Merak hadn't shown up? Did he really think a boy who had never held a sword could kill a creature he had never seen in his life? Maybe, but then he had the nerve to act as if nothing had happened, as if Percy was going insane, until he was expelled from school. Percy, I'm sorry for that moment, it was for your own good, Chiron justified himself, though his eyes betrayed some guilt. For my own good, letting me believe I was going insane. I see, Percy replied with a crooked smile, pretending to accept it. But it was mockery, pure poison disguised as acceptance. Stop making a scene, brat. We don't have to save your hide just because you're Poseidon's son. Great, another child of the Big Three, just what we needed, Mr. D cut in with irritation, glaring at him. Just tell us who your teacher is. That guy who showed up near the camp. Percy stared him down coldly before answering. Why should I tell you that? What? Dionysus had never heard a mortal speak to him like that. His anger swelled, and his frown deepened as he glared at Percy with severity. Grover, who had been standing off to the side as a passive observer, grew nervous and rushed to Percy's side. Percy, apologize, he pleaded in a panic, then turned to Mr. D with evident fear. Forgive him, sir, he doesn't know what he's saying. He just got here a few days ago, he didn't even know he was a demigod. Chiron immediately intervened, calming the god and suggesting that he let him handle it. Mr. D, however, kept glaring at Percy with annoyance as he cracked open a soda can and dropped into a chair, drinking in silence. I'm sorry, Percy, if the camp makes you feel distrustful. But after all, I was your teacher for quite some time. Perhaps I deserve a little trust, said Chiron softly. Yes, Mr. Brunner earned my trust, but he already lost it. Percy stared at him, and for a moment Chiron felt a sting in his chest. Why would I trust any of you? The first lied to me for months, hiding the truth right in my face. I don't even know if Grover is really my friend. And the other one, the moment he saw me, told me he was my father just to get something from me, without the slightest remorse. In this camp, students can be injured, even nearly die, while you calmly watch from a distance. Says the one who sent someone to the infirmary with most of their bones broken, Mr. D cut in mockingly. That's what happens when you make kids fight for their lives in a game, Percy replied with cold tranquility. Then his voice grew even more serious. I don't trust any of you. The words fell like a knife. Grover lowered his head, feeling a sharp pain in his chest, guilt pressing down on his soul. Why do you want me here? Just to ask about my teacher. Then forget it. I came to this camp because I wanted to know who my father was. To find him and insult him for abandoning my mother. But if that's all, I'll leave and go back home. Then just go, said Mr. D with a dismissive wave of his hand, as if it meant nothing. You know he can't, Chiron snapped quickly, earning yet another look of annoyance from Dionysus. Percy narrowed his eyes at those words. Chiron thought for a few seconds, searching for a way not to make things worse. Percy, the world is in danger. Your father and Zeus are on the verge of starting a war that will put everything at risk. Someone stole Zeus's master bolt, and he blames your father. Or rather, you, for having stolen it. Grover, nervous, blurted it out, interrupting Chiron, who had been trying to find gentler words. The satyr was too overwhelmed by guilt, by the weight of having hidden so much, of making Percy believe his friendship was sincere when it had also been part of a mission. Percy understood immediately. I don't have it, he said flatly. Then he looked straight into his eyes. Is that why you were watching me since Yancey? No, Chiron answered quickly. But his words sounded hollow, as if he couldn't find a way to go on. Then what do you want from me? Percy asked seriously, and in that instant his aura turned cold, distant. It was the look of someone who expected nothing from any of those present. We don't believe you have the bolt. But there is someone else who could benefit from this war, Hades. He possibly stole it and now waits for his brothers to destroy each other. After all, he still holds resentment toward Zeus, Chiron explained, though he avoided detailing the reason. Perhaps he is using this as an excuse to start a war. I see. Percy's face remained expressionless. Then good luck. He turned around to leave. Wait, brat, you're the one who has to go, said Mr. D harshly. No, thanks. Percy stopped and turned his head slightly, with a calmness sharper than anger. Why should I care? That man who is supposed to be my father was never there for me, and the only thing we share is blood I never asked for. And Zeus, he's tried to kill me more than once. If the two of them kill each other, maybe the world will gain a little freedom. The mocking curl of his lips was too much for Dionysus. The god stood with a deep frown, and an invisible aura burst forth from his body. It wasn't mere power, it was pure divinity. The mortals present could hardly bear to look at him. Instinct itself demanded they revere him, fear him, bow before him. Percy felt it instantly. His body bent against his will, collapsing to his knees. He couldn't control his breathing, he could barely move his mouth. You'd better learn to show respect, brat, said the god of wine with fury, his voice echoing like thunder. Percy could hardly lift his head, while Chiron tried in vain to stop Dionysus. And then it happened. A shiver swept through the entire camp. A primitive instinct of death invaded every soul. It was an atrocious sensation, as if a massive reptilian gaze pierced them, judging whether they deserved to be reduced to ashes. The skin of many bristled, the air grew heavy. Even the god felt it. Dionysus turned his head toward that direction, his face serious. Percy, on the other hand, smiled, defiant, mocking the divine authority before him. You wanted to meet my teacher. Looks like you managed to bring him here. 6 comments 0 vote. When the Dragonborn returns. When the Dragonborn returns. Dionysus kept his gaze fixed, watching as someone crossed the camp barrier with ease, the very barrier that prevented mortals from entering. Percy, on the other hand, wore a smile that mixed mockery and excitement, happy to be sure that his master had returned. Grover understood nothing. He stared at the hairs on his arms standing on end as the heavy steps drew closer, like the sound of death itself, ready to reap heads. Some campers felt the same, especially the weaker ones, who began to tremble and hide. The stronger ones, though afraid, peeked out of their cabin windows. Then they saw him. A figure in a black hooded jacket advanced toward the big house. His steps seemed slow, measured, yet every time someone blinked they realized he had covered several more meters. On his back, the jacket bore the drawing of a skeleton with the word, death, written beneath it. Many grew nervous, unaware that this clothing was simply the first garment Merak had found upon his arrival, and that he liked it so much he had reinforced it with enchantments the fabric barely endured. The steps echoed until they reached the main door of the big house. Dionysus watched him with seriousness, and Chiron placed himself in front of Percy and Grover as a protective shield. Suddenly, the door exploded into splinters, forcing everyone to cover their faces. When they dared to look again, Merak was standing there, hand raised as if he had struck the entrance. Silence spread throughout the hall until Merak broke it with calm. For a place where demigods are trained, the doors are rather weak, he said with a slight sneer, his eyes sweeping across the room as if scanning every detail. Percy remained kneeling on the ground, with Chiron in front of him and the satyr pressed close. Dionysus glared at them with irritation and caution, but Merak fixed his eyes only on Percy, who had not yet risen, too happy and surprised by his master's return. Merak narrowed his eyes before glancing at Dionysus. Then he spoke directly to his student. "What are you doing? My student never kneels before anyone. He will stand above all, and only beneath his master." His voice thundered, shaking the big house for an instant. "Hello, master. You disappeared for a few days. I thought a dragon had swallowed you or something." "And as always, your entrance is epic," Percy replied with a radiant smile, utterly oblivious to the tense atmosphere. "Very Viking," he added. That last remark made Merak narrow his eyes even further at him, displeased by the comparison. Mr. D watched him closely, ready for a confrontation, but froze when he saw Merak muttering words in an unknown language before vanishing right in front of his nose. Dionysus widened his eyes in surprise. He could not sense him anywhere. He looked around, on guard. A blink later, Merak was beside Percy. He grabbed the boy's head firmly and lifted him from the ground without effort. Dionysus hardened his expression further. Percy was far too close to that man, and he hadn't even felt him move. "Master, a normal person's head is pretty fragile. And the neck too," Percy complained, rubbing himself in pain while his master held him up. "Then train," Merak replied simply. "Train, my head?" Percy asked, confused. "Train so I won't have to lift you by the head," Merak retorted with a sigh, rolling his eyes at his student's nonsense, something he was already starting to get used to. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a bag tied with a cord. It looked old, worn, but still sturdy. He tossed it to Percy. "What's this?" the boy asked, doubtful as he held it. "Food," Merak replied. Percy opened the bag and his eyes widened. Inside was a vast amount of dried meat, easily weighing thousands of kilos. He lifted the bag to examine it. It was barely 30 centimeters long, yet when he looked inside it was clearly much larger within. An enchanted bag, without a doubt. With a happy smile, he gave his master a thumbs up. Merak thought to himself that the brat was truly too trusting, and once again grabbed his head, squeezing a little as if to check whether his screws were in place. Percy whined, though it didn't last long. "Wait, master, I'm sorry, it was just a joke," Percy said in pain, though he still wore a silly grin. Deep down, he was far too excited. During those days without communication he had been worried, carrying feelings that only worsened in this camp, the anger at being suddenly accepted by his father, Clarissa's bullying attempt, the capture the flag battle, the interrogation, and the pressure to take on a dangerous mission. All of it had built up, until this moment, when at last, his master had returned. Percy was truly happy, as if his master had come solely to protect him. In Merak he saw a fatherly figure, and that sensation filled him with intense joy. For an instant, Merak himself let slip a faint smile, almost imperceptible even to him, before letting the boy go. Percy rubbed his head with pain, yet stood behind his master with much greater confidence. Meanwhile, the rest of those present in the hall continued to watch that interaction with surprise, vigilance, and growing concern. Merak then turned toward them, his gaze cold, lethal, his aura radiating danger. His attention fixed above all on the god of wine. Then, he murmured, his eyes locked on Mr. D with an intensity that radiated pure menace. A battle-hungry emotion poured out of his body, the very same Dionysus remembered from the day Percy had first arrived at the camp, when he thought they were under attack. "What do you want from my student?" Merak asked with a gaze so sharp that a single wrong answer would be enough to ignite a confrontation. Even if he didn't know whether he could kill the god or not, one thing was certain, the battle would be magnificently thrilling. After all, Merak was a warrior. Facing those deemed invincible did not intimidate him, on the contrary, it fueled the excitement in his blood. And all the more after fighting Thor, the Norse god who shared so much of his ancient spirit, the love of battle, of alcohol, and of meat. They had exchanged words that had even managed to alter some of Merak's points of view. To face the strongest, to become the strongest. That was the path that thrilled him the most. Flashback. A tall man, broad but muscular, with a slightly thick beard, sat beside an improvised bonfire. He roasted a heavy slab of goat meat while next to him rested an enormous barrel of liquor, whose aroma could tempt even the wine gods of different pantheons. The place was an open field, with trees in the distance and animals wandering peacefully. The only strange thing was a white door set to the side, out of place, but in truth the exit of that domain. In front of him, Merak stood waiting, his aura of battle overflowing, as he patiently let the man finish cooking and eating before the fight began. The day they first met, Merak had crossed the door of the Hotel Valhalla accompanied by Odin, and right at that moment he encountered Thor. Their warrior spirits flared instantly, shaking the surroundings and shattering glass with nothing but the clash of their auras. The two of them instantly drew their weapons, thrilled at the prospect of battle, while the Valkyries and the Einherjar rushed in to stop them, right in the middle of the hotel's reception hall. Odin stopped them before disaster struck, so they postponed the battle until Merak had completed his mission. Now, at last, the time had come. Thor raised his eyes, excited not only for the fight but also for the meal that was nearly ready. "You really make me a bit envious," he said, taking a great swig of his liquor from a wooden cup. Then he poured another and tossed it toward Merak. Merak raised an eyebrow, glanced at the liquid within the vessel, and after a sip accepted it with a firm nod. "You have a freedom you still don't understand," Thor continued. "If I had that same freedom, I'd be challenging every god of battle I could find." Ha ha ha, his laughter rumbled like thunder through the skies. "Then just do it," Merak replied coolly, as if it were nothing. "If only it were that simple," Thor shot back with annoyance. "If one of us fell, it wouldn't just mean the loss of the loser's divinity. The pantheons, even if they pretended to accept it, would end up causing a war. None of them ever want to appear weaker than the other." He spat to the side in contempt. "Bah, politics. The only battles between gods you'll see in these times are empty threats, or outright an apocalypse, or Ragnarok." At those last words, his expression turned serious, conflicted. For a warrior to know his end even before the battle. Then he changed his face again, and with boredom tore off a piece of meat and devoured it in one bite. "That's why I say you're lucky," Thor added, fixing his eyes on Merak while pointing at him with the piece of meat he held. "You're someone not bound to the destiny of this plane. Treasure that freedom. You still have much to learn." He finished his sentence, swallowed the bite, and threw his cup into the fire, which flared with a crimson glow. Then he grabbed the hammer resting beside him. The moment he held it, it surged with electricity, and Thor's eyes shone with the same power that coursed through his body. A wide smile, brimming with excitement, lit up his face. "Let's see if you can endure more than my dear brothers in battle," he declared as the sky, clear a moment before, darkened with storm clouds split by lightning that fell upon him. Merak flung his empty cup aside. Before him appeared a black greatsword, forged from dragon bones and reinforced with every enchantment he knew. The blade sank into the ground with ease, and Merak gripped the hilt, raising it calmly. "I'll set myself a simple goal for my first battle against a god. I want to see the color of your blood," he said with the same thrill in his voice. Thunder roared across the heavens as the earth trembled at the imminent clash between a god and the power of the voice, and the knowledge of an entire plane. End of the flashback, the memory of that battle still burned in Merak's blood, an inextinguishable flame. His gaze returned to the present, fixed on Dionysus, with the same intensity he had directed at Thor that day. The silence in the big house was absolute. No one dared to move. The air was heavy, as if a storm were about to break. "I'll repeat it only once," Merak said gravely, each word echoing like a thunderclap. "What do you want from my student? Clash of wills. Clash of wills. Your student, or whatever he is, has a mission, and you are not the one who decides whether he fulfills it or not." Dionysus's words dripped with the arrogance of a god, as if the man before him had no right to interfere in what the Olympians had already decreed. As if Percy were nothing more than property, forced to obey divine orders. "And who will force him?" "You," Merak asked, his voice growing colder, his eyes sharpening like blades. Chiron felt a chill run down his spine. He knew that Dionysus's next words would determine the course of what came after. If he answered poorly, the clash could erupt into a battle that might tear the camp apart. The centaur trusted the god he had worked with for so long, but for the first time, he sensed that the figure before him was not ordinary. No, that man was anything but simple. He was a master of demigods and heroes, and he could sense the hidden power in others. And in Merak, he sensed it with terrifying clarity. The difference was stark. Gods like Dionysus could break anyone with the sheer weight of their divine presence, pushing mortals to their knees by instinct alone. Merak, on the other hand, needed no such thing. To be under his gaze was to feel the eyes of thousands of dragons upon you, all deciding whether to devour you or burn you alive. It was the look of a predator that forced you down, not through reverence, but through raw fear of being prey. Not even Hercules himself had ever made him feel that way. "And if I did, do you think you could stop me? I am a god, mortal. You have no voice here," said Dionysus, unable to contain the anger boiling at the sight of a mere man showing no respect to his divinity. Merak held his gaze and, after a brief silence, smiled. A smile filled with battle instinct, as if those words were exactly the excuse he had been waiting for to unleash a fight. "Wait, please," Chiron interrupted, sweat running down his brow. His voice trembled with urgency. "We are not looking for a fight, and Percy cannot be forced to accept a quest if he does not want it." The centaur fixed a firm look on Dionysus. The god frowned, visibly irritated, and finally turned his eyes aside in annoyance. It was true, they could not force a demigod to take a quest. But in practice, none had ever refused. There were plenty of reasons. Many accepted them to grow stronger, others for the promise of adventure, but, deep down, the true motive was something else, the hope of forging a bond with their divine parent. Abandoned children, desperate for even the smallest sign of affection. That was the cruel truth. Many risked their lives, even died, just to earn a glance or a word of acknowledgement from those who had left them half-orphaned. Chiron knew this better than anyone. Most of these youths had come to camp after losing everything, without family or home. To discover that a god was their father or mother was, for them, a flicker of comfort, though it came wrapped in danger. The centaur decided to change the course of the conversation before Merak and Dionysus said something that would push them all straight into disaster. "Percy, listen, this is important. The whole world is in danger. And it's your father. It's also possible that if you uncover the true culprit, Zeus himself will realize his mistake in accusing you and leave you in peace." His gaze was serious, but at the same time carried a trace of hope. Merak, however, looked on with a faint smirk, as if the idea of placing such a burden on a child's shoulders were laughable. Merak stayed silent for several seconds, and at last spoke calmly. "If the world needs a 12-year-old boy to be saved, then the world is weaker than I thought." Percy, without breaking eye contact, replied with quiet determination, certain his master would be there to support him. "Fine. Then let all mortals die and be swallowed by war. A brat like you doesn't care about any of that, right? My only concern will be that there will be no more wines to taste." Dionysus's voice oozed indifference, as if he were speaking of a trivial inconvenience. Chiron could only sigh. Though he tried to hide it, he hoped those words would plant something inside Percy. The boy furrowed his brow. Having the fate of all humanity rest on him was too much, even if he tried to hide it. Merak watched him silently. The brat, he thought, was easy to manipulate. He let out a sigh. He would not interfere with his decision. He was not a nanny, not there to shield him from every scratch. He was a teacher. His task was to instruct, to strengthen, to pass on what he knew. If Percy chose poorly and died, then that would be the lesson he deserved. Yet, as the thought formed, a flicker of irritation pierced Merak's chest. Something uncomfortable, strange, as if the idea of losing his pupil was not as meaningless as he wished it to be. For a fleeting instant, he even considered that, if it came to pass, he could simply bring him back. Turn his death into part of his training. Not even Merak realized how contradictory that thought was. Percy, meanwhile, was trapped in his own indecision. "You can think it over, Percy, before rejecting it. We will not force you." "We cannot," said Chiron firmly. The boy pressed his lips together, then nodded. "I'll think about it," he muttered at last, before turning around and leaving the big house. Merak followed him with his eyes until he crossed the threshold. Then he turned back toward Dionysus. The god held his gaze, sharp and unyielding, like a silent challenge. But Merak, instead of responding, simply lost interest. He turned on his heel and walked away. There would be time later. After all, he had just returned from a battle against none other than the Norse god of thunder. Percy held his head in both hands, elbows resting on the table inside Poseidon's cabin. Silence wrapped around him, broken only by his own sighs. He finally lifted his gaze toward Merak, who was calmly observing the interior, turning over some dusty, dirt-stained objects in his fingers as if they were worthless trinkets. "Master, what do you think I should do?" Percy asked at last, his voice tired. The weight on his shoulders was so heavy that even his eyes seemed dimmed. Merak turned slightly, with that same unshakable calm that defined him. I don't care," he answered coldly. "Decide whether you want an adventure or not. The rest can die without consequence. They are not of your importance, nor are they worth your life. Only you give value to what you are, and only you can decide what to spend it on. I am your master, the one who guides you, but you have enough freedom to choose your own steps. He said it without drama, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. Percy clenched his teeth and lowered his head again. But, if the world really is in danger because of my father and that man. The boy never finished the sentence. Marak watched him in silence for a few seconds before letting out a short sigh. You think too much, he muttered. His eyes, however, showed no harshness, only boredom. To him, mortals were less than dust, disposable pieces on a larger board. Whether they lived or died meant nothing. If the gods wanted to fight, let them fight. What did the fate of such a weak world matter to him? And yet, Percy was half mortal. That half tied him down. Perhaps, Marak thought, he should at least give him a sliver of perspective. He remembered then something he had grasped during his conversations with Thor. Gods draw their power from their believers, or from those who still remember them. If a war destroys them all, if mortals die, then the gods themselves will weaken, they might even vanish. The words fell into the cabin like an echo. What? Percy lifted his head, startled, but instantly realized his master was gone. As always, he had vanished without warning, leaving him alone with the thought. Ah, he left again, Percy muttered in frustration. Still, that clue was enough to set his mind in motion. The boy began pacing in circles, repeating Marak's words over and over until finally his lips formed a conclusion. Then, if they fight and endanger mortals, they themselves would be in danger. They won't let that happen. It's just a bluff. He said it with seriousness, as if he had uncovered a hidden truth. On the roof of the cabin, Marak heard every word. He rolled his eyes, somewhere between tired and amused. Close, but not the wrong path, he murmured under his breath, granting his student a trace of approval. He rested his hand on his chin, thoughtful. If other pantheons exist, they will not allow the Greeks to unleash chaos that ruins their own faithful. These Olympians are stepping straight into the eye of the storm. Although, a slow smile crept across his face. If a great battle truly breaks out, it will be interesting. His gaze drifted toward the invisible horizon beyond the cabin walls. In his eyes gleamed a dark interest, not in saving the world, but in witnessing its destruction and measuring the strength of each god in the clash. To Marak, the Greeks were, so far, the loudest and most troublesome among all pantheons. Perhaps, he thought with disdain, they were not even respected by the others. The letter from the underworld and the Oracle of Chaos. The letter from the underworld and the Oracle of Chaos. Percy was still unsure whether he should accept that mission. He lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling, completely lost in thought. In moments like this, his master was of little help. Marak always let him decide for himself, which, according to Percy, was absurd. After all, he was just a 12-year-old kid carrying the weight of protecting human lives on his shoulders. He let out a weary sigh and sat up slowly, determined to reject that ridiculous responsibility. However, just before he could do so, he noticed something on the nearby desk, a letter. A black envelope that hadn't been there before. Even at a glance, it radiated a foreboding aura. Percy frowned. He eyed the envelope with suspicion. No one had entered his cabin, and if his master wanted to speak with him, he wouldn't need to leave a letter. Marak preferred to say things directly, or send, that magical thing, he used to appear out of nowhere. Still, something deep inside told him he had to read it, that not doing so would be a mistake. He approached cautiously, picked up the envelope, and read the words written across the back. To Percy Jackson, from your teacher, Dodds. Percy's eyes widened, a chill ran down his spine, and a faint fear surfaced as the memory of that day returned to him. It wasn't just the letter that shocked him, it was the fact that the woman was alive. His master had told him she was dead. In fact, Percy had asked about her some time ago, recalling the moment he'd been attacked, when Marak intervened and defeated her. His master's response had been simple, direct, leaving no room for doubt. She's dead, and yet, there was her name. Percy needed to know how that was possible. Without another thought, he broke the seal and opened the letter. He pulled out the paper with trembling hands and began to read. Despite his usual trouble concentrating, this time he focused with all his might. But soon he realized there was no need to force himself. He could understand it. Every line was written in a different language, and yet he understood each one with startling clarity. In fact, he grasped them even better than his own tongue. Percy pushed those distracting thoughts aside and focused on the message. The words were simple, but carried a dreadful weight. Come, your mother is with us. If you don't bring it, she will die. His eyes shot open. "Master!" he shouted. Merak, who had been resting on the cabin's roof while enduring the constant gaze of a certain god, heard his disciple's cry. In an instant, his body dissolved into mist, passing through the roof and materializing directly in front of Percy. The boy was on the verge of collapse, pale, trembling, clutching the letter tightly as he read it over and over again, terror carved into his expression. Merak frowned and took the paper from him. It took him no effort to understand, even though the language was foreign. After all, he had spent centuries in Apocrypha, the realm where all knowledge of the multiverse converges. Learning a new language after seeing it once was trivial to him. "Master, they have my mom," Percy said with a trembling voice, clinging to Merak's robes as though seeking something solid to hold on to. The fear was dragging him down like an anchor. "Calm yourself," ordered the Dragonborn, and without hesitation, he gave Percy a sharp smack on the head, followed by a calming spell that washed over him like a wave of serenity. Percy blinked, startled, but slowly his breathing began to steady. Merak, meanwhile, examined the black envelope carefully. It wasn't just a message, it was crafted to manipulate, to provoke despair. The young demigod exhaled deeply, trying to organize his thoughts. "Master, what should I do? My mother, where is she? Where am I supposed to go?" he asked, his tone caught between worry and determination. He didn't doubt that he had to go, he just wanted to know how. Merak studied him in silence, shaking his head in resignation. It was frustrating to see how easily others could manipulate his pupil, but he knew he had to let him stumble so he could learn to rise again. As he often said, Nords are raised through hardship. The god of the underworld, he finally answered. He knew exactly where that so-called Mrs. Dodds came from. "It seems you'll end up taking that stupid mission after all," he muttered, narrowing his eyes. Perhaps this was part of fate. And if there was one thing Merak understood, it was that fate, no matter how absurd, was rarely escapable. He had read the legends of Tamriel and knew of the Elder Scrolls, though he never touched them, he knew their wisdom could blind the reader. Even so, he understood their truth. Everything ever written eventually comes to pass. As he rubbed his chin in thought, Percy, impulsive as always, bolted from the cabin. Maybe to seek information about the underworld. Maybe to formally accept the quest. Merak watched him go, sighing. "More than fate, it's like a lamb being led to slaughter," he murmured, irritation flickering in his voice at how easily his student could be swayed. But he also knew it was normal. Percy was still a child. He lacked experience. And if there was one thing Merak intended to teach him, it was exactly that. "Then you'll have to suffer a little, my student," he said quietly, watching Percy's back as the boy ran toward the big house, where Chiron and Dionysus awaited. "So you'll learn not to let just anyone mess with that foolish head of yours." He watched a moment longer before fading into mist. If his student wished to embark on a mission that endangered his life, that was his decision. Merak would not stop him. He wouldn't be his master if he didn't allow him to face danger. After all, Merak himself had grown up amid destruction and constant battle. He was born in ancient Tamriel, and if the current age was harsh and perilous, no one could imagine what the world was like when its rulers were dragons who believed themselves gods. Merak had spent his entire life fighting, constantly. Not just to survive, but to make a name for himself. To be recognized among his own kind. Until, finally, he was accepted as a dragon priest. And even that hadn't been easy. Each of those priests had been more monstrous than the last, not only because of their power, but because of the mountains of corpses they left behind to be deemed worthy by the dragons who proclaimed themselves gods. Merak had fought them as well. The very dragons who believed themselves divine. His life had been an endless sequence of battles, conquests, and defeats, without a moment of rest, until he was imprisoned in that eternal place that became his cage. That was why, now, in this new world, he had begun to enjoy, if only a little, the freedom it offered him. He knew it wouldn't last. Not while there existed beings stronger than himself. Unless, of course, he became one of them. The words of Thor, the god of thunder, echoed more vividly in his mind. "Treasure that freedom, you still have much to learn." At the time, Merak hadn't fully understood them. But now he was beginning to. There had been a hint of envy in the god's voice, a spark of melancholy. A god so powerful, and yet, he envied freedom. "Are you sure, Percy?" asked Mr. Brunner, studying the boy standing before him, posture firm and serious. "Yes," Percy answered, nodding with determination, offering no further explanation. Brunner looked at him with pride. Perhaps the boy had truly thought it through. Though the danger worried him deeply, it also moved him to see such resolve in Percy's eyes. Like a true hero, the child had chosen to risk his life to prevent a war that could destroy the world. "That's admirable, Percy," Brunner finally said. "But I must warn you, this will be a dangerous mission. You'll face trials that will test your life, your battle skills, and your ability to think clearly. That's why you'll need allies. But before that, there's something you must do first." Brunner's expression turned solemn, his voice carrying the weight of a teacher about to impart an important lesson. Percy would have left immediately if he could, run into the night and start the quest right away. But apparently, there were preparations to be made before his departure, and one of them was receiving an oracle. For that reason, the next morning he was sent to an old attic in the camp. There, he would receive the prophecy that would mark his destiny. Meanwhile, his master, just as always, had disappeared. When Percy returned to the cabin, Marak was gone. Perhaps he disapproved silently of Percy's decision to accept something he had previously rejected with pride. Percy knew his master well. Marak was a proud man, and he expected the same from his student. But at that moment, pride didn't matter. His mother was in danger. He climbed the stairs slowly, glancing around. The attic was filled with dust, stacked boxes, and shelves covered in old junk, trophies, jars, broken decorations. Each step creaked beneath his feet. He walked through the dim space until he stopped, startled by what he saw at the far end, an unmoving figure seated in a rocking chair. It looked like a mummy. It didn't move, didn't even breathe. Percy watched it in silence, frowning. Was that thing supposed to be the oracle? Hello, he tried, taking a cautious step forward. Silence. Not even a twitch. Great, I'm really starting to hate this place, he muttered with resignation. Then, from the mummy's half-open mouth, a green mist began to flow. It swirled slowly, like a small tornado, taking shape before his eyes. "Wonderful," Percy said sarcastically. Because that figure looked familiar. Too familiar. Someone who shouldn't be there. Or rather, someone who shouldn't still be alive. Seeing him appear as mist left only one possible explanation. A ghost, back from the other side, perhaps seeking revenge. Instinctively, Percy drew his sword and assumed a defensive stance. But the figure didn't move to attack. It simply looked at him, and spoke. "You shall go west and face the god who has rebelled," said the hollow, distorted voice of Gabe. "You shall find what was stolen and return it safely. You shall be betrayed by one who calls himself your friend. And, in the end, you shall fail to save what matters most." Percy slowly lowered his sword, realizing this was the oracle. He sighed in frustration. I see," he muttered, turning to leave. But Gabe spoke again, his voice now deeper, almost divine. "When the echo of ancient fire awakens the slumbering titan, the first of draconic blood shall rise before the power that devours all. There shall be no victory, nor defeat, only inevitable ruin. For even restraint will bring collapse, and peace shall be but a mirage. What he seeks to protect will be lost beyond recovery. And that which he wishes to return shall never find its destiny." Percy stopped. The ghost's head began to twitch violently, as if unseen hands were tearing at him. The boy stared in confusion as Gabe's voice warped even further. "Beneath a starless sky, the ancient fire shall descend into the sunless realm. Not for hate, nor for war, but for the weight of forgotten measures. The Lord of Shadows shall watch with eyes of judgment. And within his soul he shall find the balance no god has ever seen. If the draconic one extends his hand with true purpose, even death shall open its gates, and the pact shall be sealed with honor." Then, a dark energy swept through the room. Gabe's mist-like body began to twist and writhe, as if being torn apart by invisible forces. From the mummy came a sound, a broken wail, half scream, half sob. And finally, with a voice that thundered through the darkness, the oracle proclaimed. "When the son of the sea breaks his bonds and embraces the banner of chaos, the World Eater, the Twilight God, shall awaken unchained. Neither gods, nor heroes, nor fates shall rise against him. And the heavens themselves shall shatter beneath the roar that heralds the end. Then shall he join the bringer of the end, and together they shall devour existence until nothing remains." The mist that formed the ghost exploded into 1,000 bright fragments, vanishing into the air. The mummy remained still, lifeless once more. Percy stood frozen, unable to fully comprehend what he had just witnessed. His breathing grew heavy as his mind struggled to make sense of the words. But something told him that, from that moment on, nothing would ever be the same again. Now available up to chapter 15 on my Patreon. If you're enjoying the story, I invite you to check it out there and read the advanced chapters. I truly hope you enjoy it. This is my new novel, and I'm putting a lot of effort into it. Also, I'm working on another story that I'll be sharing with you soon. Web links. To be continued. Thank you all for watching.